big data analysis to understand online songbird trade in Indonesia. In this study, we try to apply machine learning work to analysis big data of online trade to give us hint on the online trade market of songbird in Indonesia. Together with partners, Sephora Craft research team is working closely with key stakeholders and policymakers to overcome the challenges by trying to enhance the relevance and promote the uptake of Trade Hub research, supporting decision makers to develop and implement relevant policy and regulation in palm oil, coffee, and wildlife trade. Trade Hub Indonesia disseminates research findings and recommendation through various events and participation on relevant forums. Trade Hub is also engaged with scientific community and public through dissemination events and capacity building activities on sustainable trade and development research. Among Trade Hub research team, there are early career scientists that actively involves in the research.
The hope of this project, the Trade Hub project, is providing data, information, and also knowledge to decision-making processes, to policymakers on how to make palm oil, coffee, and wildlife more sustainable.
How do we transform the supply chains of agricultural commodities? The Trade Hub, a network of over 150 experts, define problems and co-develop solutions to address the social, economic, and environmental impacts of trade in agricultural supply chain systems. Together with local farmers, communities, researchers, and decision makers in the public and the private sectors, we present a roadmap to just and sustainable trade to encourage actions towards systemic changes in global trade markets. Today, we'll explore our vision and action tracks, emphasizing the need to create trade systems that meet the needs of smallholders, indigenous peoples, and local communities.
To deal with complex issues and encourage transformative thinking, the roadmap explores the business as usual of trade systems, activities and mechanisms leading to information, and patterns and new ways of doing things that will succeed the business as usual in the long run. In essence, this is the 3 Horizons framework developed by Bill Sharp and colleagues, which we have used to present the roadmap. The long-term successor of business as usual in the 3 Horizons framework is represented by a collective vision of just and sustainable trade. In this vision, trade respects planetary boundaries and promotes the well-being for all within the trade systems. It's rooted in 5 separate principles. Firstly, a contribution to well-being. Secondly, balancing consumption. Thirdly, practicing accountability across borders. Fourthly, reconciling international and local policy making. And finally, safeguarding the environment.
To achieve our vision of just and sustainable trade, our roadmap proposes 5 action tracks: consumption systems, production systems, local to global markets, the costs and benefits of trade, and smallholder needs. These are actions to move beyond the business as usual paradigm of trade systems and transition to our vision for just and sustainable trade. As part of that, we call on a variety of actors, the private and public sectors, civil society, the media, and smallholders to address their responsibilities in the action tracks. Let's delve more into Action Track 5, meeting the needs of smallholders.
The need and urgency to implement sustainable trade systems is growing. However, the policies in place are still insufficient. Current production systems involving major agricultural commodities in developing countries are not socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable for small farmers, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Land insecurity and a lack of long-term financial investments are the key roadblocks preventing smallholders in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean from meeting their needs and aspirations in just and sustainable supply chains. Moreover, women have less access to land credit and training. To change the business as usual of present trade systems, actors in the private sector could facilitate these access points, while the public sector must guarantee land rights, particularly for women.
If the recommendations of the roadmap are enacted, we are aiming to see national fiscal policies tailored to the needs and aspirations of smallholders, long-term credit and financing available to smallholders, fair and equitable sharing of costs and benefits from trade, and rural development integrating ecological, agricultural, social, and infrastructural systems to fit local realities and needs. Please join us in taking an active role in transforming global trade towards a just and sustainable future.
Mais si je ne dois vivre que de la production de cacao, dans la situation actuelle, ce n'est pas possible.
You see how water is pouring from my skin? Because I'm searching better life.
Cocoa farmers are trapped in a cycle where they have to borrow money in anticipation for some revenue.
We need to start doing something right now before we end up with an empty country with no trees.
It has to be part of a hybrid strategy that involves smallholders.
Et ici, la durabilité vient même avec des contraintes supplémentaires qui vont augmenter les coûts. Et si le prix reste le même, ça ne peut pas aller. Ça ne peut pas aller.
The Trade Development and Environment Hub, Trade Hub, is a global research consortium. Various agriculture and wildlife commodity trades are in focus of research in 8 countries and involve around 50 partner organizations. In Indonesia, Trade Hub is focusing on palm oil, coffee, and wildlife trade. Sephora Craft is coordinating Trade Hub research activities in the country, together with our partners, Wildlife Conservation Society, Research Center for Climate Change University of Indonesia, IPB University, and Lampung University.
I'm Harry Purnomo, senior scientist at CIFOR, as well as professor at the IPB University. Now I'm leading Trade Hub project in Indonesia. Trade Hub is the acronym of Trade Development and Environment Hub. So, as you know, Indonesia is the world leading countries in producing palm oil and coffee, as well as the source of wildlife trade in the globe. So, we recognize the trade-off between both domestic and global trade with the sustainability of forest, sustainability of biodiversity contested. So the Trade Hub project aims to deliver benefit, to ensure benefit, to make a global trade to benefit local landscape, the high-risk landscape, as well as a local community. This is the major aims of Trade Hub. So we work in Indonesia in several provinces in Sumatra, Kalimantan, and also West Papua. So we do hope that this project able to deliver that kind of benefit.
Toward the main goal, Sephora Craft Research Team is conducting various research to understand at-risk landscapes and associated supply chain risks to guide sustainable production using range of expertise on sustainable value chains of commodity. We are working closely with key stakeholders to understand and define political economy of sustainable palm oil trade in Indonesia. To understand trade actors and actors network in palm oil, coffee, and wildlife trade, we conducted stakeholder mapping and stakeholder network analysis. We collected big data from media analysis, identified the actors, network of actors, and their role in the network. Another research on wildlife trade, we conducted big data analysis to understand online songbird trade in Indonesia. In this study, we try to apply machine learning work to analysis data of online trade to give us hint on the online trade market of songbird in Indonesia. Together with partners, Sephora Craft Research Team is working closely with key stakeholders and policymakers to overcome the challenges by trying to enhance the relevance and promote the uptake of Trade Hub research, supporting decision makers to develop and implement relevant policy and regulation in palm oil, coffee, and wildlife trade.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Disseminates research findings.
We are going to start our event in 5 minutes. Please kindly enjoy the coffee break, and also please kindly take the front seat.
And capacity building activities on sustainable trade and development.
Once again,
research.
We will start our event in 5 minutes. Please kindly enjoy the coffee break and also take the front seat. Thank you very much. Yes. Yes.
How do we transform the supply chains of
We will begin our
commodities?
event in 5 minutes,
Trade Hub,
and please kindly fill the front seat. Thank you very much.
Together with local farmers, communities, researchers, and decision makers in the public and the private sectors, we present a roadmap to just and sustainable trade, to encourage actions towards systemic changes in global trade markets. Today, we'll explore our vision and action tracks, emphasizing the need to create trade systems that meet the needs of smallholders, indigenous peoples, and local communities.
To deal with complex issues and encourage transformative thinking, the roadmap explores the business as usual of trade systems, activities and mechanisms leading to information, and patterns and new ways of doing things that will succeed the business as usual in the long run. In essence, this is the Three Horizons framework developed by Bill Sharp and colleagues, which we have used to present the roadmap. The long-term successor of business as usual in the Three Horizons framework is represented by a collective vision of just and sustainable trade. In this vision, trade respects planetary boundaries and promotes the well-being for all within trade systems. It's rooted in 5 separate principles. Firstly, a contribution to well-being. Secondly, balancing consumption. Thirdly, practicing accountability across borders. Fourthly, reconciling international and local policy making. And finally, safeguarding the environment.
To achieve our vision of just and sustainable trade, our roadmap proposes 5 action tracks: consumption systems, production systems, local to global markets, the costs and benefits of trade, and smallholder needs. These are actions to move beyond the business as usual paradigm of trade systems and transition to our vision for just and sustainable trade. As part of that, we call on a variety of actors, the private and public sectors, civil society, the media, and smallholders to address their responsibilities in the action tracks. Let's delve more into action track 5, meeting the needs of smallholders.
The need and urgency to implement sustainable trade systems is growing. However, the policies in place are still insufficient. Current production systems involving major agricultural commodities in developing countries are not socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable for small farmers, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Land insecurity and a lack of long-term financial investments are the key roadblocks preventing smallholders in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean from meeting their needs and aspirations in just and sustainable supply chains. Moreover, women have less access to land credit and training. To change the business as usual of present trade systems, actors in the private sector could facilitate these access points, while the public sector must guarantee land rights, particularly for women.
If the recommendations of the roadmap are enacted, we are aiming to see national fiscal policies tailored to the needs and aspirations of smallholders, long-term credit and financing available to smallholders, fair and equitable sharing of costs and benefits from trade, and rural development integrating ecological, agricultural, social, and infrastructural systems to fit local realities and needs. Please join us in taking an active role in transforming global trade towards a just and sustainable future.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our event shortly. Please kindly fill the empty seats in the front row. Thank you very much.
Mais si je ne dois vivre que de la production du cacao, dans la situation actuelle, ce n'est pas possible.
You see how water is pouring from my skin? Because I'm searching better life.
Cocoa farmers are trapped in a cycle where they have to borrow money in anticipation for some revenue.
We need to start doing something right now before we end up with an empty country with no trees.
It has to be part of a hybrid strategy that involves smallholders.
Et ici, la durabilité vient même avec des contraintes supplémentaires qui vont augmenter les coûts. Et si le prix reste le même, ça ne peut pas aller. Ça ne peut pas aller.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting soon. Please be seated. Good afternoon, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Food and Agribusiness of the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, Indonesia, represented by Mr. Dida Gardera, the Honorable Mr. Abednego Tarigan, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Human Development, the Executive Office of the President of the Republic of Indonesia, leadership and representative from Indonesia Government Agency, leadership and representatives from organizing institution, UNEP, UNCTAD, IPB University, University of Indonesia, and UNEP WCMC as the lead of the Trade Hub Consortium, distinguished speakers and guests. We are delighted to welcome you to the Regional Stakeholder Consultations in Asia, Nature Positive Trade for Sustainable Agriculture Supply Chains and Inclusive Development today in Jakarta, Hotel Borobudur, 26 September 2023. I am Dia Puspitalaka from C4ICRAF, will be the MC for today. Today's event is the collaborations between the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, with the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development Biotrade Initiative, UNCTAD Biotrade, and the Center for International Forestry Research and World Agroforestry Center, C4ICRAF, with IPB University and Center for Climate and Sustainable Finance of the University of Indonesia. Today, we will discuss priorities, challenges, and opportunities in the regions and explore recommendations for actionable solutions to a sustainable and inclusive nature-positive trade. The event will also hold cross-regional exchange between stakeholders from Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, who will share their perspectives on solutions and the way forward to promote a trade system that is supportive of sustainable agriculture, protecting biodiversity, and also facilitating sustainable development. I would like to inform you that there are event links that are available in your table, and we will commence our event today by singing the national anthem, Indonesia Raya. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand up. We will sing Indonesia Raya together. Thank you very much. Now you may be seated. And now I would like to invite Professor Heri Purnomo, the Director of Indonesia Country Program of C4ICRAF, and also Professor at IPB University to deliver a welcome remark.
Terima kasih Mbak Dia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon everyone. First I would like to thanks to everyone to join us to the Trade Hub event in Jakarta. Particularly I would like to thanks to Bapak Abednego Tarigan. He's the Deputy Chief of Staff for Human Development, the Office of President of Republik Indonesia. Also, I would like to thanks for joining us, the Deputy Minister of Food and Agribusiness, coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, and will be representing by Mr. Dida Gardera. Ibu Musdalifa sent her regret because she's in India now for another conference on palm oil. Also, thank you for the leader and representative from Indonesia government agency, including BRIN, the Indonesian Research Agency, from the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, Ministry of Agriculture, and others, and also leaders and representatives from organizing institutions, including UNEP, UN Environmental Program, and UNTAD, UN Conference for Trade and Development, IPB University, and also University of Indonesia, as well as representative from UNEP WCMC, the lead of Trade Hub Global Consortium. Ibu Listen, thank you for coming again to Jakarta. And also to invited panelists and participants, representative from Government of Indonesia, foreign embassies, international organization, business and association. Thank you Pak Agus Purnomo, Pak Bremen from Apikal, Pak Agus from Sinarmas, academia, and civil society like SPKS. Thank you Mbak Dia Suradireja, ya, not Dia Raharjo ya. Sometimes my mind is going to Dia Suradireja. Ya. Thanks everyone for joining this event. I would like to present a bit about the Trade Hub. As you see, let's see. This is about the Trade Hub. This is a project globally led by UNEP WCMC from Cambridge, UK. Next, please. This is a research hub funded by UK Research and Innovation, Global Challenges Research Fund, UKRI GCRF, and led by UNEP, UN Environment Program, Wet Conservation Monitoring Center, UNEP WCMC, and the hub consists of 50 organizations that based in 15 countries, including Indonesia, of course. So Indonesia partners C4ICRAF, WCS, Mbak Jenny is here, Jenny Pereira. Also IPB University, Lampung University, and University of Indonesia, ya. Bapak Sony Mumbunan. Ya. UNEP leads public sector work and strategy at the global and regional level. And C4 and partners lead, particularly in Indonesia, also involve research in Africa as well. Yeah. This is from February 2019 until March 2024. Yeah. Focusing and addressing intractable challenges in sustainable trade of agriculture and wildlife commodity trade. This is a nice picture when we were in Cambridge or London. Yeah. Okay, at the beginning of the project. Yeah. Next, please. The scope of trade global work is commodities in focus, palm oil, coffee, soybean, bamboo in China, of course, rattan, rubber in Malaysia, cocoa, soybean in Latin America, of course, wildlife and wild meat and many others, including songbird. So this is a variety of commodity. So it's very important for the work of Trade Hub, how the global trade benefit environment and local people. So make sure that's not easy, because sometimes the trade of agriculture could jeopardize the forest, the environment. But Trade Hub work how to synergize, how to reconcile between trade, between making money and also environment. Next, please. This Trade Hub Indonesia says many journal articles, of course, publication, as well as we work on the ground to develop kind of sekolah lapang petani sawit in Pelalawan, di Desa Segati. So it is publicly available. So it's work on the, for instance, how important global trade for sustainability of palm oil. So one of key factor of sustainable palm oil is green consumers. If this consumer doesn't care about the sustainability, then quite difficult for Indonesia to have sustainable palm oil. Also, how important the government to lead to make our palm oil become more sustainable. I many times to say, Pak Abednego, that sustainability is part of our constitution. If we look at the Indonesian Constitution, Article 32.4, it is very clear, crystal clear, that sustainability is there, that our economy is developed in sustainable manner and environmental friendly. It is not our interpretation, but written there, crystal clear, it's well written. So it is, even though this is the word aspiration to be more sustainable, but also written specifically and clearly in the Constitution of Indonesia. Next, please. There's several things that also we work in Indonesia, how to link between palm oil, food, climate, and energy crisis, how to develop roadmap into more sustainable palm oil in Indonesia, in line with other initiatives. We have ISPO here, we have Rencana Aksi Nasional, the National Action Plan. There are many plan and action in Indonesia from the public as well as from the private sector. So how we combine, how to synergize between public and also private sector, between Indonesia and also the consumer country. I like the statement from Pak Abednego in the last policy dialogue. You mentioned that Indonesia as well as European, US have the same interest, how to make what more sustainable. Just different priority now. Environment is clearly become the priority of European countries, but Indonesia, yes, environment, but we still facing poverty. We still have to develop infrastructure. How then to synergize between common interest but different priority, how to help each other, how to understand each other. It's very important that Indonesia understand what the consumers want, and the consumer also understand what the situation of Indonesia. But in the long term, I think it is our common interest. Next, please. So today's event is beyond Indonesia. It is a regional process in Asia, because Trade Hub is not only working in Indonesia, of course. We work in China, in Africa, in South America as well. Yeah. So in Africa, there's a lot of issue of the deforestation, oil palm in DRC, in South America as well. How the soybean competing the forest. Will be discussed here. So thank you for Beatrice for try to synergize to Fabi how to make sure that we could contribute not only to a particular country but also to global processes. Yeah. I know that Professor Neil Burgess, the lead of the consortium, the lead, is how to make a trade hub contribute to different processes like COP biodiversity. Also, I was try to contribute to COP climate. This is the global processes. But again, we have the same goal, just sometimes different priority now. I think that's all what I can say. Again, thank you for you all for joining us. I hope you enjoy this event. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Heri Purnomo, for the welcome remark. And I would like to invite Mrs. Valerie Julian, UN Resident Coordinator in Indonesia, United Nations.
Distinguished participants and colleagues, it is my pleasure to speak to you through this video message. Let me first express my appreciation to all the panelists, representatives of government, and CGR colleagues who accompany us today. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone to this event as co-organizers. UNCTAD would like to thank our co-partner for the fruitful collaboration in organizing this meeting, UNEP, Center for International Forestry Research, CIFOR, Institute Pertanian, Bogor University, and Center for Climate and Sustainable Finance, University of Indonesia. I would also like to thank the Swiss State Secretariat for their continued support to UNCTAD and biotrade initiatives. Today's meeting is very important and timely to explore and provide recommendations for actionable solutions to move towards a sustainable and inclusive nature-positive trade. UNCTAD has been working towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which recognizes the international trade as an engine for inclusive economic growth. And we believe that this can be done through sustainable use of biodiversity as trade as an important means of implementation for the Sustainable Development Goals. Since 1996, UNCTAD Biotrade Initiative has been supporting developing countries and strengthening their capacity to design and implement mutually supportive trade and biodiversity policies and measures. The core of biotrade is the biotrade principle and criteria, which is a set of guidelines for government, businesses, and civil society to conserve biodiversity through sustainable trade of biodiversity-based products and services. As we expand our work in the area of trade and biodiversity, this meeting will provide us with valuable insight, and we look forward to collaborating with each one of you. Asia, particularly the ASEAN region, boasts incredible richness of biodiversity. Despite occupying just 3% of the Earth's landmass, this region is home to 20% of the planet's flora and fauna, 35% of its mangrove forests, and 28% of its coral reefs. This is a gift. But a gift carries a significant responsibility and accountability, highlighting the critical role of the region in conserving biodiversity. This is why it is crucial that we jointly identify challenges and opportunities in the region to promote and build responsible, sustainable, and inclusive trade through sustainable supply chain of agricultural commodities that conserve biodiversity. There's no doubt this meeting will see rich exchanges and will pave the way to co-creation of innovative solutions. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion, and thank you.
if you still carry your commodity in a freighter that uses a dirty fuel, then you haven't solved your problem. Because there is a huge emission factor embedded in the trade, in the transportation. Similarly, if you don't give to the producer a fair price for the product that they are doing, and if you don't level the playing field between people acting poorly in terms of environment, livelihood, social benefit, and the people acting very cautiously in terms of these elements, then of course you create a perverse incentive because one of the products is cheaper than the other. Again, as to reflect on what UN delegate was saying, I mean, a sort of, we still have a huge amount of perverse incentive working in the trade sector. The biggest one is fossil fuel. We are subsidizing fossil fuel at the rate of $12 million per minute. So since I have started this talk, we have given $60 million to the fossil fuel industry. Unless we change that, it is very unlikely that we'll end up having anything that is close to sustainability in a matter of trade. And so I think it's important to have these events where people from different sectors, people coming from the executive office of the president of Indonesia, people coming from UNEP WCMC, research center like C4 and ICRAF, academia like APB, other partner, I'm sure that we have civil society representative here, PKS, NGO, come together and say, okay, how are we going to fix this whole question of trade from the producing point to the consuming point so that it becomes, and I would say sustainable, I mean, that's the idea, at least a bit less unsustainable and a bit more durable, and so that we are not in the situation of the captain of the Titanic, who has 1 minute to take a direction to avoid the iceberg, and if you miss this minute, whatever you do after, you eat the iceberg. And I think we are in this time, and we need to change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robert Nasi, for the welcome remark. And I would like to invite Bapak Abednego Tarigan from Deputy of Chief of Staff for Human Development, the Executive Office of the President of the Republic of Indonesia, to deliver a keynote speech on nature positive trade for socio-economic development in Indonesia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, Salam Kebajikan, greetings and good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank Professor Dr. Henry Purnomo, a senior scientist and Indonesian Program Country Director at Interim C4, and the rest of the C4 team for inviting me to speak in this forum. Distinguished speakers, and all of participants from university, government representative, research institutions, business associations, CSO, and media. As we all know, the nature positive trade of food and agriculture play a key role to end extreme poverty, deliver food security, and foster an inclusive and sustainable development. This is important topics to discuss as there is an increasing role that the trade and trade-related to policy play in addressing the global biodiversity crisis. From WWF report in 2022, by region, Asia-Pacific stands at 55% biodiversity loss, which show continued decline between 1970 to 2018. We are the third region when it's come to biodiversity loss after Latin America and Africa, but this is still very alarming. We all recognize that we are facing an unprecedented multitude of the crises due to the biodiversity loss. Related to Indonesia's position on nature positive trade, Indonesians supports the concept of nature positive trades for socio-economic development. The President is very concerned on the protection of biodiversity. Just this year, the Presidential Instructions number 1, 2023 on the mainstreaming of biodiversity preservation in sustainable development. He has ordered 90 relevant ministry, head of the government's institutions, and also governors and mayor to ensure the planning and the implementation of biodiversity preservation policies in the tandem with the achieving sustainable development targets and increasing economic value of products, both the national and regional level. This is also include law enforcement effort if necessary. The government has also emphasized the commitment for biodiversity protections in the National Long-Term Development Plan for 2025 and 2045 for all of its project and policy, now still on process of the discussion between the governments and the parliament. From the Ministry of Economic will be explained about the several government's policies in Indonesia's governments put the emphasis on the implementation of sustainable trade in the various sectors, such as palm oil, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries and industry. We are also aware that the framework and commitment that are currently in place, as well as trade policies adopting by the importing countries, regional blocks with the regards to nature positive trade, like a Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and the last is EU deforestation regulations. Specifically, biodiversity related to sustainability requirements, both mandatory and voluntary, such as certification schemes, due diligence, and traceability. The use of special technology is being carefully examined by the Indonesian government. We must ensure that these commitments reflect the real conditions and the current production capacity of all actors, including smallholders farmers. We stress the importance of the adherence of the principle. We all are familiar with common but differentiated responsibility with the implementing of this nature positive trade policy. We also highlight that need the consistent transparency, consultations, and collaborations in the applications of the international frameworks of such policy. The important point in advancing nature positive trade is that this is a multidimensional issues. We must recognize that while we need to ensure the conserving nature play an important role in the global value chain, we must also hit the principle such as a fairness and prosperity for the people and particularly farmers. Therefore, it is priority of the Indonesian government to ensure the implementations of multinational agreements, regional frameworks such as the EUDR remain people-centered and inclusive for the socio-economic benefit of the people. For the effective implementations of nature positive trade in Asia and commodity producing countries such as Indonesia, these are several triggers points I would like to highlight that I hope can be discussed in this forum. The first is the importance of big data management of the farmers and land use of farming to strengthening traceability effort of the commodities. And the second, inclusive funding, partnership schemes, and knowledge transfer by developed countries and the big companies to the smallholders farmers in producing countries. And the third, gradual implementation scheme of nature positive trade policy for smallholders farmers. And the fourth, identification of the green jobs that are projected to be created by the implementing nature positive policies. And the last, the fifth, types of public participations required for the monitoring of the nature positive trade policy. In conclusion, nature positive trade policy, both adopted domestically and the global trade scheme, hopefully can offer a variety of opportunities not only for the conservation of nature, but also prosperity of the people. Thank you for looking forward to listening to the discussion by the distinguished panelists here in this forum. And I hope by the end of the day, we can hear some tangible recommendation that all relevant stakeholders can consider implementing, especially for the context of the commodity producing countries in Asia and Southeast Asia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abednego Tarigan, for the keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin the panel sessions, we will take a group photo. I encourage you to stand up, and we will have our photographers to take pictures from the front stage. So please kindly stand up. We will take a good group photos. Just stand up at your seat. We will have your photo taken from the front stage.
One, two, three. One, two, three. Big smile. 1, 2, 3.
Today we will have 2 panel discussions. The first panel discussion will be on the state of play in Asia, opportunities, challenges, and priorities to promote sustainable agriculture supply chains and how trade can support. We will have Ms. Beatriz Fernandez, the Associate Program Management Officer on Environment and Trade from UNEP, who will be moderator for the sessions. Over to you, Ms. Beatriz.
Thank you very much, Tia. May I invite the panelists to take a seat, please, at the stage? Thank you. Polite and give you the center. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to everyone. Thanks for your attention, and to all the welcome speakers and the keynotes. Good afternoon again from Jakarta to all of you joining us today, Your Excellencies, representatives of governments, experts, ladies and gentlemen, and to all of you following us today online around the world, and welcome to this session. As Dee already introduced myself, I'm Beatriz Fernandez. I work with UNEP, the United Nations Environment Program. And let me just give a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists today. We have Ms. Henriette Fagerman, the first Counselor for Environment, Climate Action and Digital of the Delegation of the European Union of ASEAN. We also have Mr. Alex Lau, the Team Leader for Environment and Sustainable Commodities of the British Embassy in Jakarta. Thank you. Mr. Agus Purnomo, Senior Advisor of Golden Agri Resources, and I'm sure a lot of you already know him. And we have 2 more panelists online that you will see on the screens to your left or right. We have joining us Ms. Corazon Che de Jesus. She's the Director of the Sustainable Use and Access and Benefit Sharing Division of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. And Mr. Abu Meridian, the campaign's leader of Kaum Telapak. And very welcome to both of you online. I'll be very brief and thank again to our wonderful partners, UNCTAD that is here today. We also thank the Center for International Forest Research and World Agroforestry, IPB University, the University and Center for Climate and Sustainable Finance of the University of Indonesia for the wonderful collaboration for making this consultation possible, and certainly to UNEP WCMC and to the Trade Hub Project for the support. And the panel today, we're aiming to discuss and exchange insights, perspective, and actions that we'll hear from the expert today, from governments, from private sector, from civil society, to understand what are the challenges, what are the priorities, but also what are the opportunities in Asia to promote sustainable agriculture and supply chain, to protect nature, to safeguard the environment, but also facilitate a sustainable social and economic development. And in all of this, what is the role of trade to catalyze action for it? As we have already heard from previous interventions, this is a very timely discussion because we are facing a triple planetary crisis on nature loss, on climate change and pollution, the three of them interconnected, but we're also seeing unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. And we have also seen that there is a global pattern of trade that has been disrupted and is causing the rising food and energy crisis. As we know, agriculture is a significant sector that contributes to this region, and equally, this region is a significant contributor to the global output in the world, with smallholders at the core of this sector. And let me just start briefly by putting the context of why we're talking about in all this mix about trade. Why are we trying to find the synergies between environment, biodiversity, and trade? And just to re-mention that over 50% of the global domestic product depends on nature. And international trade is plays a key role for development and growth. Actually, according to estimates from UNCTAD, the global trade reached a record of $32 trillion in 2022. So while there's increasing evidence that trade can actually have negative impacts on people, on nature, there are also opportunities for trade to become a positive actor for change. So in today's session, we're trying to understand and discuss how do we build a mutually supportive vision between trade, between biodiversity, and between social and economic development. There are many good news that we have heard this afternoon at the start of this consultation from the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, from free trade agreements, from all the work that ASEAN countries are doing and the region is also doing. So let's have a conversation now. Just before we start, a few short housekeeping points. I'm going to start asking each of our panelists in person and online for their intervention. Then we're going to have the opportunity to exchange with all of you for questions and answers. And I also invite the people who are following us online to put your questions on the QA box. And at the end, we're gonna have a final round with your last key comments, and we're gonna close the session. So without further ado, let me introduce and invite Henriette Fagerman to give us your views on, first of all, you're going to give us a glimpse and an overview of what are the developments of the EU Deforestation Free Products Regulation, and also to understand, in your view, what are the key enablers and actions to make a reality this vision between trade, biodiversity, and sustainable development. Please go ahead. To all of you, you can follow the presentation on the screens and also online. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to those who might be joining from elsewhere. Thank you very much for inviting me for this panel and giving me the opportunity to present the regulation on deforestation and forest degradation-free supply chains. I think many of you may have heard my presentation before. I've given it about 100 times already, but I will try to make it more exciting. So in case you have heard it before, watch out for the good news. So let's move directly into it. Next slide, please. I think I don't need to say so much about the context. It's there on the screen. There's a lot of forest loss that is still happening, has still been happening during the last 30-year period. A lot of this forest loss is legal, and these are the forest loss and deforestation are important drivers for climate change and loss of biodiversity. I think we've heard it already in the introductory remarks, and here you see some numbers that have been assembled on how this actually looks. Also, we've already heard that a big part of the deforestation is linked to expansion of agricultural land, and that this is linked in particular to a more limited series of commodities. And then the last point why the EU has decided to engage on this issue and regulate on this issue is that we in the European Union are major consumers of the commodities, some of the commodities that can be associated with deforestation and forest degradation. And our consumers are very clear. They do not want to consume products. They like the products, but they don't want to consume them if they can be seen or associated with deforestation or forest degradation. Next slide. So what the regulation is about, generally, to minimize the EU's contribution to deforestation and forest degradation worldwide, and thereby also reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss contribution. And we do this in two ways. First of all, by minimizing the risk that the products from supply chains that are responsible for forest degradation or deforestation can be put on the European market, but also, and I think this is very timely for today's conference, to make sure that we increase the European Union's demand for and trade in legal and deforestation-free commodities and products. Next slide, please. So I think if you have followed this for a while, you probably know very well the scope: palm oil, soy, wood, cattle, cocoa, coffee, and rubber. Most of them relevant for the region, or definitely for the regions of people who might be listening online. So these were selected, I would say, based on a really thorough impact assessment. You may have noticed that at first there were only 6 commodities that was proposed by the European Commission. Rubber was added during the negotiations that led to the final regulation. But basically the impact assessment that was carried out showed that these were the most important commodities from 2 points of view. First of all, from contributing to deforestation, and secondly, matched with the EU's consumption of these. So this does not mean that these are the only commodities that contribute to deforestation anywhere in the world, but it means that it's the ones where the EU has a consumption that would kind of justify that we are working on this. There will be maybe an expansion of the scope over time if the situation changes, if more commodities will contribute to deforestation in a different way, or if the trade patterns change so that the EU will start importing, exporting more of other commodities. Next slide. So let me just quickly run through the principles, because we hear a lot in different fora, and there seems to be sometimes confusion on what it is that this regulation actually does. So first of all, there's no ban on any country or any commodities. So all the countries and all the commodities, that even the ones that you just saw on the screen, are still can still be sold on the European market. The operator can demonstrate that the commodities are deforestation-free and legal. There's no discrimination, because this regulation applies both to the products that are produced in the EU and imported from outside. And then the last important principle is the cut-off date of 31st December 2020, so which means that products that are produced on land that are deforested after that date are not allowed on the European market, whereas if land was deforested, let's say in 2019, the products that are produced on that land are allowed on the European market. This is important because, first of all, I don't know what's wrong with this microphone. Am I holding it correctly? Let's try another one. Thank you. Let's see if this is better. So this cutoff date, as you're well aware, is in line with the SDG commitments of halting forest deforestation by this date that was agreed in the context of the SDGs and signed up to by the global community. So you can say that this is actually the EU putting into law what we have all agreed. And then also, very importantly, that there is no punishment for historical deforestation, but it's really an aim to try to look forward and prevent further deforestation and forest degradation. Next slide, please. So what the actual requirements of the regulation is, there is two main things. One of them is mandatory due diligence, which will be carried out by operators who place the products on the European market or export them from the EU. So it's the EU operators that have the responsibility under the regulation. And they have to prove that these products are deforestation-free and legal and traceable. And this they have to do by a due diligence statement. So it's, as you can see, a rather limited number of requirements that needs to be demonstrated. We often get questions about how certification schemes or other third-party systems can be useful for the deforestation regulation. And the reply is that they can be very useful because they are actually a very important source of information that the operators on the EU market can use when they carry out the due diligence. They cannot replace the due diligence statement, but they can definitely be used as a source of information for the operators. Next slide. So the other important part of the regulation is the country benchmarking, which will make sure that there is a risk assigned to countries or region according to the risk of deforestation. 3 different categories: standard, low, and high risk. The criteria are quite straightforward, linked to the rate of deforestation and agricultural land expansion. And this system is currently being developed by a technical support contract. So this will be ready a little bit later before the implementation of the regulation. For the moment, again, we hear a lot of stories sometimes about this or that country that will be high risk, low risk, standard risk. For the moment, everybody is at standard risk, and that's very important, and there are no changes that will happen unless there is a consultation with the countries that would be concerned by such a change. So what it actually means, not so much in terms of the actual workload, because the due diligence procedure will be largely the same. If you are standard or high risk, it will be the same amount of work that has to be done. If you're low risk, then it will be a little bit less work because you will not have to carry out a risk assessment. The main difference is that there will be more controls for the higher risk, so 9% controls of shipments from high risk area, 3% for standard, and 1% from low risk. Next slide. Right now we are preparing for the implementation, so we are really stepping up cooperation with both the government and private sector of all the countries where this will have an impact. And here, particularly in Indonesia and Malaysia, as you may be aware, we have established a task force where we are looking into the specific issues that may be tricky or may be required to look at in the implementation of the regulation. So, for example, smallholder issues is of course very important. Linked to how do we establish traceability and a number of other issues that are similar for other countries, but here with a focus on the commodities that are really relevant for these 2 countries. As I said, there will be a specific dialogue with countries that could be classified as high risk, and this we will know later on which they might be. We are in the process in the European Commission to develop guidelines for all the operators and traders that will help them to make sure they know how to implement this, and putting a number of support tools in place to make sure that it's as easy as possible. Next slide. So the implementation tasks, very briefly, we're in the process of developing an IT system that will make information very easily accessible for all the operators on the European market so that we avoid duplication of work. The benchmarking, as I mentioned, we are in the process of developing an implementing act that will be up and running by the entry into application, which is December 2024, the guidelines. And then we have already started preparing for review of whether other commodities or other parts of the regulation will need to be amended later on. So you can see a timeline here. And if you go to the next slide, you can see all of this in a more graphic way. So basically we are now in the period after entry into force and before entry into obligation. So we are in this 19 months time slot where we are really trying to find out how can we cooperate and how can we make sure that this implementation will be as smooth as possible. So I hope that this both gave an overview and replied to your first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henriette. And as Harry said at the beginning, seems like all countries have the similar objective. And it's good to see that developments are also incentivizing cooperation among countries, and we see the opportunities as well to continue. And now I will turn to you, Alex. He's a team leader for environment and sustainable commodities of the British Embassy in Jakarta. We know the UK is doing a similar path on due diligence for its risk commodities. And there's definitely a lot of interest to also understand what is the UK government's vision about sustainable commodities. I know you have a presentation for us, so I invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you to the UN institutions in Indonesia and to C4 for extending the invitation today. What a fantastic and extremely varied audience, across government, civil society, private sector, really great group. So thank you. So, I mean, the UK and Indonesia have been working in this sort of area for a really long time. So it extends, So our kind of partnership on sustainable agricultural production extends literally decades, to the 2000, 2001 Jakarta Bali conferences on FLEG, and even before. So we've been working on this stuff for a long time, and we recognize it's hard, and we recognize that the process continues, and this sort of engagement is really important, I think, for like moving that process forward. So I only have one slide. Sorry, I have so much less information than Henriette. It's really embarrassing, and that's basically because the UK hasn't actually laid its legislation that will do a kind of similar thing around deforestation. And so I'll set out a bit of the context and the things we're trying to achieve, and then try and explain a bit about the way that we're going to do it. So the kind of legislative approach. So I think where we really start is with national policy. We recognize that the only way to have systemic impact as a relatively small part of the market is to work with producer countries in ensuring that the national policies are really strong and well respected. So that's been a really core part of our partnership with Indonesia. Over the last sort of 25 years, we've helped to build SVLK, the system which monitors and governs sustainable timber production in Indonesia, as well as now, given that we, the UK and Indonesia, have a trade agreement on this, helps to monitor the trade in sustainable timber between the UK and Indonesia. We've also been working very closely with the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs on developing and strengthening the legislation that underpins ISPO, as well as trying to work out how best we can implement that across Indonesia. So trying to have a standard that is strong, sustainable, but also provides economic benefits, in particular for smallholders. So that's kind of on the national policy side. And then we see that, national policy sets a really firm foundation for action, but what's really important is implementation. And there, it is really tough. Obviously, the stronger your standard, the harder the implementation is. And so if you want to aim for a strong standard, and I think we all do, then you really need to work hard on implementation. And one of the best ways to get implementation going is to introduce really strong incentives. We can provide as much development assistance as we can, but ultimately what will work is the market responding. And so we've been really trying to focus on this. As I mentioned, we now have a trade agreement with the EU on sustainable timber, and so we think that provides better market incentives because UK producers will more easily access Indonesian sustainable timber. We're now trying to explore how we can broaden that out. So how can we take lots of different countries, all of whom import timber, and try to get them to engage with the Indonesian Sustainable Timber Standard in a way that will keep on strengthening those market incentives for complying with that timber standard in Indonesia. And then you look at something like ISPO, palm oil. Let's be realistic. The implementation of this with smallholders in particular is very low. How can we move towards better implementation, particularly in smallholders, but also in large businesses? And we've spoken to many large palm oil producers, and a lot of them will have some of their mills certified ISPO, and some of the mills still not. So what is the direction forward for that? So the UK sees a path here in terms of our legislative approach in providing better market incentives for national policy. And so we introduced in 2021 some legislation which we called the Environment Act. And so the Environment Act explained that we would be bringing forth secondary legislation, so more technical legislation, around UK forest risk commodities regulations. And basically what that will do is introduce a due diligence obligation on particular large firms who are importing large quantities of a particular set of commodities to ensure that those commodities were grown on land that was legally occupied and legally used. So legal land use, legal land ownership, or land tenure. And what we think is really helpful about that is basically what we're asking companies to do is ensure that their production is legal in the country of origin. And so this creates a really strong market signal for those all those national systems that we talked about to try and ensure that smallholders and large businesses alike are complying. And so again, this helps to strengthen implementation, which in turn allows for strengthening of the standards in terms of sustainability, all leading to better market access. So it's a really, really good virtuous cycle. We recognize in particular that there is quite a big problem with smallholder uptake. And so that's why we have specific initiatives around capacity building. We work directly with smallholders in some instances, working with smallholders to comply with SVLK, to comply with RSPO and ISPO, but also we work with larger firms to try and ensure that they can meet these requirements while still including smallholders within their supply chains. So trying to ensure that large firms can still take risk-based measures that incorporate smallholder activity. The final thing, I think this sort of ties everything together, is around international collaboration. And I think Valerie mentioned in her opening statement the FACT dialogue, Forest Agriculture Commodities Trade, which we co-chair with the government of Indonesia. So I think it's really important for us that we open up these kind of spaces that are not negotiating spaces, but are spaces for genuine dialogue. And we see with SVLK and sustainable timber that this was not started in WTO space. It wasn't started with threats and negotiations, but it was started with groups of countries that wanted to change and make a difference. And there was an open space that enabled that. And so that's why we're putting a lot of energy into the FACT dialogue and into other related initiatives like the Amsterdam Declaration Partnership, and indeed the bilateral trade dialogue that we have with Indonesia, which is called the JETCO. But just in your request to me, you asked for a couple things you thought would be really important opportunities. And actually, I think for me, it's recognition that these things take a long time and loads of people working together. And so I think, just to reiterate, it's great that we're all here. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. And what we're hearing more and more now is the consideration of the inclusion of smallholders, the recognition that the challenges of all these market regulations are posing into them, but also the actions that are being taken to support them, from capacity building. And there was something really interesting that we heard at the beginning from Dr. Robert.
The program manages a regional network of representative protected areas created to generate great collaboration between the AMS in preserving their shared natural heritage. I'm putting this into context because the site level experiences that we are implementing, that we are doing, that I will be sharing with you in the next slides, are anchored and are being implemented at the ASEAN Heritage Parks, in selected ASEAN Heritage Parks, and in the surrounding communities or the buffer areas adjacent to the protected areas, to the ASEAN Heritage Parks. Next slide, please. I will focus on two projects or programs that we have implemented in support of livelihood at the site level. First is the biodiversity-based products as an economic source for the improvement of livelihood and biodiversity protection, or the BBP project, which was supported by GIZ, and the small grants program, which is supported by by KFW. Next slide, please. So the biodiversity-based products project, or the BBP, was implemented between from 2015 to 2019 with the objective of the ACB supporting the ASEAN member states in the promotion of their biodiversity-based products for the improvement of livelihoods and biodiversity protection according to their needs. I will just share here some key outcomes. Out of this project, 7 BBP value chains were promoted, resulting in better income and conservation of biodiversity for the local communities. For instance, the implementation was in 3 ASEAN member states: Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Vietnam. For Cambodia, vine handicrafts and black ginger were sold and established business linkages with buyers in Siem Reap and in Phnom Penh. In Laos PDR, some products out of bamboo were awarded with the District 1 product certificate, and this project also resulted into reduced logging, poaching, and slash and burn. And it also provided regular income to the community surrounding the protected area. And in Vietnam, several products also came out, and the value chains of these were also established, such as the bokai. Bokai is a sort of vegetable that is found only in one of the ASEAN Heritage Parks. Production of medicinal bath herbs, honey, and jaculam. Jaculam is a kind of tea also found only in one of the ASEAN Heritage Parks. And so the value chains here provided premium income through sales and purchase contracts with the private sector, and then in situ and ex situ planting measures continued to support conservation of biodiversity. Next slide, please. The Small Grants Program with the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity, as I said, was supported through a financial cooperation with KFW with the objective of strengthening biodiversity protection and management of natural resources in line with the basic needs of the local population in the ASEAN, by strengthening the role of ACB in promoting biodiversity protection, focusing on the national component, which is more of our site level support. It aimed to improve biodiversity protection and to improve the livelihood of local communities. We are working in the program, the SGP, is working in 3 AMS, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Indonesia, in selected ASEAN Heritage Parks. So in Myanmar, we are working in 4 ASEAN Heritage Parks. In Vietnam, there are also 4. And in Indonesia, 2 ASEAN Heritage Parks, namely Gunung Loiser National Park and Waikamas National Park. The projects in Indonesia officially ended December 2022. Next slide, please. Just some highlights out of the program includes, for instance, in Myanmar, currently ongoing, we are supporting mangrove restoration in one of the ASEAN Heritage Parks, and it is a cash for work intervention wherein the communities living around the protected area produce the mangrove seedlings that will be utilized in doing the rehabilitation of the area. At the same time, in one of the other ASEAN Heritage Parks, some grants are also provided for projects on sanitation improvement, sustainable agriculture, community ecotourism, community forestry, and sustainable fishery. In Indonesia, as I mentioned, we ended the project in December 2022. Out of the small grants program in Indonesia it produced 25 new products, and out of the 75 grant projects that were implemented, which also included 3,538 beneficiaries having been trained in various capacity development activities. In Vietnam, which is now currently ongoing, there are 10 microgrant projects wherein activities include composting, pig raising, ecotourism training, and awareness raising. And also 18 small grant projects in the buffer areas, in the adjacent communities in the selected ASEAN heritage parks under the thematic areas of conservation livelihood, ecotourism, improvement of non-timber forest products, and support to farmers cooperatives. Next slide, please. I would just like to highlight some outcomes out of the Indonesia small grants program. These included enhancing the skills and capacity of women in targeted villages through a series of alternative livelihood interventions such as bamboo handicraft, backyard home garden, bee farming, eco-printing development, and business entrepreneurship. And as I mentioned, new local products were developed and marketed, such as traditional health drinks, pineapple dodol, honey and honey value-added products, as well as upscaling of value-added products of banana chips. Highlighted there are just some of the outcomes coming out of the small grants projects in Indonesia. Next slide, please. One of the questions that Beatrice also posed for us in making this presentation is, what were the challenges and opportunities coming out of those site level implementation? As you can see from the beginning of my presentation, the title of my presentation is Biodiversity Conservation and Livelihood: A Balance in Implementation. We consider this as a balance because we are looking at we are encouraging communities surrounding the protected areas to stop extracting resources from the protected areas as a form of their contribution to conservation, which in turn is also their contribution in the management of the protected area. Traditionally, protected area management is only within the government, which is government-led. But the projects at ACB, at site level, encourages collaborative management. But this proves to be both a challenge and an opportunity. Top-down approaches that have been practiced and that is traditionally being done and that is operationalized in protected areas will really take time to be reversed, or at least accommodate the participation and collaboration of all stakeholders. It also poses a range of possibilities in exploring new partnerships, new approaches, encouraging new stakeholders to be involved, balancing out the roles of each of the stakeholders in terms of managing in the management of the protected area, as well as encouraging local communities surrounding the protected areas to explore other means of livelihood besides extracting resources from the protected area. Another challenge, I think this is quite common, is the complex processes in government regulations, coordination, and feedback mechanisms, as well as even the whole mechanism of the small grants program. For instance, the grant administration can also be quite complex. So this was really quite a challenge in the implementation. The project duration is deemed short to fully realize and achieve results. For instance, under the small grants program, The small grants is only for a period of 12 to 14 months, while for micro grants it's only for 6 to 8 months. While there are a lot of outcomes and results coming out of the small grants, when we asked for feedback from the grantees and the beneficiaries, they really mentioned that the implementation period is quite short. And that's the challenge as well in terms of how is sustainability being factored after all of the implementation. Which leads me to the last challenge, which is establishing relationships for sustainability and future endeavors, including marketing, partnerships, institutionalization, and policy. This becomes a challenge, especially for local organizations, local communities who do not normally factor these in their operations or in their normal everyday activities. So if a livelihood intervention actually becomes an opportunity, the other connected factors that would enable them to participate in a larger market becomes a challenge because they're not really used to engaging in this wider arena of marketing their products. Next slide, please. I think that would be my last slide. So what were the lessons that we have learned out of these experiences at site level? Local communities become interested in managing biodiversity resources once they understand and they perceive that there's a direct economic benefit. We have a saying in the Philippines that if it's near the gut, if experience is close to the gut or to the stomach, that's when it becomes more appreciated or it becomes more real for them. The recognition and appreciation of local communities, market and trade actors, and local authorities of the value of biodiversity-based products are heightened when they are made aware of how biodiversity conservation and management leads to economic benefits. So another lesson here is linking producers to private sector was a key factor in making value chains successful. So even while it's not really the normal thing for them to do, the projects, specifically the BBP project, factored in having to link those who are producing, the producers with the private sector, so that there's a clear the market, the value chain becomes appreciated and successful. Involving all relevant local government agencies helped to clarify rights and responsibilities of communities to manage biodiversity resources in a sustainable manner. There may be differences in terms of policies at the local level, at the district level, even at the provincial level. But just the same, if all local authorities would be involved and would be given the opportunity to really collaborate and interact and have a clear engagement with communities in terms of these projects or these site level implementations, it would clear the air in a way in terms of clarifications of what exactly are policies, what exactly are the responsibilities, and what are the avenues that the communities could actually tap into, so that in managing biodiversity resources, there's a more collaborative nature happening between them. Another lesson is facilitating learning and exchange processes help stakeholders overcome initial hurdles in production, processing, conservation, and institutional growth. So capacity building is always very important and valuable in any implementation. As a baseline, if there are really a lack in capacities in terms of as simple as managing finances or organizing or connecting with the right people when you do the marketing. It's always important to factor that in any of the project implementation, so that it in the long run, even beyond the project life, stakeholders, beneficiaries would carry this on in terms of how they will continue with the project, even beyond funding or even beyond the intervention of those organizations coming in. The second to the last lesson, anchoring the origins of a product with stories of its source, its environment, and the culture attached to it provides a strong identity, advocacy for conservation, and the marketing promotion that will not lead to exploitation of those resources. It is what we observed out of the products coming out of the communities is they attach a strong story, and that's anchored on history, anchored on culture, and it provides a good it's a marketing promotion, but at the same time it carries an advocacy that is also linked to the conservation of the resource where that product originated from. So it's important to keep the stories, keep those exchanges in culture on how it was produced, because that's always a valuable element when the product is being marketed, but not to the extent of having it abused or having it exploited. Those are very important factors to be taken into consideration. Lastly, new and emerging market models are exciting, definitely. E-commerce, social media marketing, the live selling on social media, use of cyber currency or other currencies that may be used for trade and marketing. But these would need to be adaptable to realities at the local level. It is not an immediate solution, or it should not be given as a false promise for communities that once they learn these new market models, or they learn about these new technologies in terms of marketing their products, they would immediately have an increase in income. It's important to adapt it to the realities and how they are really doing it at their communities at site level, because in the long run they will be the one carrying it on, and it will not be dependent on any organization outside, and the support coming from the institutions surrounding them would be very valuable if they will also be very much involved in that reality. And terima kasih. Maraming salamat.
And thank you, Chair, for giving us a zoom in of what's happening in the countries in the ASEAN region, also for connecting us to the next speaker that you actually mentioned. The private sector plays a key role in all of this, in the implementation, in capacity building. We also see the opportunities for many countries to access finance, which is another important element. So now I invite you, Agus, he is the Senior Advisor of Golden Agri Resources. He also has a presentation that will help us facilitate the discussion, and you have an important intervention to tell us what's the role of the private sector and what actions are being taken to move this agenda forward. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Beatrice. First of all, thank you to C4, UNEP, and other organizers of this event for inviting me to share some of the results of the journey that we had in, to be short, in complying to EUDR. And the next slides, please. So the questions about actions, what do we do? First of all, in trade, you need to know who are you buying from and who you are selling to. And that means you need to know, as a producer of farm products, your suppliers. We need to know who that sells fruit bunches to us, where they are, how big is their plantations. And then we need to know how the fruits is traveling from one plantations to another plantations to the mills, and then the palm oils from the mills to the refineries. We need to develop the internal traceability system to be able to allocate the information from the plantation to the end products that we sell. Traceability systems such as blockchain can help in developing trust among the stakeholders. Pilot testing is definitely, and then lastly, we need to create value of this extra effort because those efforts are costly. Next slide. Now, what are the challenges? As has been mentioned before, in palm oil sector, there are more than 2.5 million smallholders that produce palm oil. And if we use the ISPO or RSPO certification as a proof of clean and clear products, unfortunately, there is only 1% of that 2.5 million individuals who has that certification. And simply because of that, the product of the small farmers will not be allowed to get into the supply chains to Europe. In other words, the UDR will create an effective ban to the product of the 2.5 million individual farmers because they cannot fulfill the requirement. Now, why is it so? Unlike timber, coffee, cacao, processing palm fruit bunches into food or other industrial goods involve complicated process. The fruit bunches change form from solid fruits into liquid, into gas, solid, and back and forth, both at the mills and at the refineries. They also travel long distances with trucks, with barges, with ships. So a sophisticated traceability system is needed if you really want to know where is the chocolate that you are eating coming from. What may be the shortcut is to require that the product must be segregated. It's simple. If everything is already kosher from the beginning, already halal from the very beginning, and keep it separated from the dubious product, then you get the kosher products at the end. But segregated is, first of all, technically maybe possible, but it is so expensive that it's not affordable. Next slide. Now I would like to focus on the later on the issue of traceability. But before that, I would like to answer your questions about the contribution. The company that I'm working for since 2017 has already collected the smallholder supply. So we have a total of 150,000 farmers, data farmers, including their plantations, that get into the supply chains of GAR. The number sounds big, but it is very small compared to the 2.5 million of smallholders in Indonesia. I doubt that there is any other company who has as much as 150,000 farmers' data. But we have gone through analyzing the internal traceability challenges, as I mentioned, the difficulty of liquid, solid, gas, back to liquid again. But we need to have that at every invoice that we issue, we can provide the information of where the fruit's coming from. Now, on the other part of our contributions, of the company's contributions, companies have been trying to help smallholders with the replanting programs and also with the capacity building to help smallholders in getting the sustainability certification. There are also a number of other things that we have been doing, but let me focus on the real critical issue to address the issue of trade. Next slide. Now, this is just the illustrations. On ISPO, we only have 34 certificates. On RSPO, 117 scheme smallholders, and independent is only 17,000 independent smallholders of that 2.5 million. Next slide. This is the challenge, right? You may think that the traceability is simple, from estate to mill to refinery to the buyers. And at every step, there is a scale to find out how many kilograms, how many tons that you bring. Next slide. But you need to remember that the traceability involves two parts, the internal and the external. The internal including where the independent smallholders coming from, where the agent coming from. Also that where there are so many palm oil mills in Indonesia, more than 2,000 mills, who most of them are not certified. So all those products coming into the refineries and all the products from the refineries goes to the buyers in Europe. Continue, next slide please. Just to give illustrations, one batch of a sales order that we issued to a buyer, actually in the refinery, it came from 9 batches. At the bulking area where we have storage tanks, it has 72 batches. And those 72 batches coming from 25 palm oil mills. Those 25 palm oil mills came from 90 estates. That's only one batch. So if we have thousands of batch, then the complications you can see. Mind you, that because of the process within the mills and the refineries, the original geolocation is commingled with so many other things, getting back and forth. So we need to have a system to enable a trustworthy traceability system. Next slide. These green dots shows the complications. Every green dot represent the commingle, the mix up of various batches within a process. With this so many green dots in just one batch, then we need not only to learn exactly, because normally if you process one in one tank, for example, then you don't do it emptying the tanks and move to another one. At the most, you probably only send 80% or 90%. So the rest 10, 20% that has the same location will then be mixed with the others. And so it continues. So that shows the complications. Next slide. We talk about external. There are agents, sub-agents, sub-agents before we go to the individual farmers. Now, this is where it's critical, and I'm thank you for Bapak Abednego Tarigan, who is willing to stay to listen to this, because this is where we have the biggest challenge. Next slide. In order to produce different types of products, we are delivering traceability to mills, which is already done. Traceable to the plantations, partially done. 98% of the company that I'm working for, products are traceable to the plantations. We still have 2-3% that are not. Quality product on surfaces. Certain buyers requires very specific quality, and that cannot be done by the traceability system of mass balance or only the transaction, because the quality is commingled within the process. You need to have a different level, a more deeper traceability. For the NDPE score of food and safety, for example, also food and safety, the Chinese buyers are very particular with this characteristic. The existing traceability system cannot deliver that. We need to come up with molecular or batches tracing. The future EU regulations is a question mark, because the UDR is one thing, the NDPE can be solved, but only partial. Next slide. So there is no softwares that you can buy for the type 3. Type 1, yes, you have. There are consultants who can do that. Type 2, yes. The type 3, you don't have it. We need to develop it by ourselves. So hopefully we can come up with a system internally that can be tested and can be shared with the others by next year. Next slide. So what is it? The enablers to move forward. We need to move from 1% to at least 50% to enable the smallholders to get into the supply chain. Because that 1% is actually spread in many places. So it's even less than 1% in a particular mill that that they are close by. And if we want to bring them on board, we need to get 50%. And that 50% certainly can only be done if the public sector is involved. And we cannot just create a system where then the small farmers apply and submit forms. That is a waiting game, right? We need to be proactive. We need to have jemput bola, Pak Nego. We need to increase from 1% to 50%. And that can be done if there is a team assigned to go one district after another district and doing all the censusing so that the small farmers are registered. And being registered, they have legality and they have locations. But right now, this month, is only 15 months before the UD are going to be enacted. How are we going to do increasing from 1% to 50% if there is no special decree, special instruction to tell the Ministry of Agriculture, go and collect the data and put it in your system? Otherwise, they will not be able to get into the supply chain. A realistic roadmap is needed, even though with all the hard work, with all the intention, the political will of bringing on board the smallholders, we may not have enough time in 15 months. So we need to sit together with the EU, with the other respective buyers, and come up with a roadmap. We need time to deliver this. Malaysia only probably need 200, 300,000 farmers more to do, and they are thinking to us for extension. We have 2.4 million farmers to collect. So just an example, anecdotal example. One of the NGO, IDH, has been able to bring 3,000 farmers in Aceh to be registered on the electronic STDB system. But they have to do it. They can do it after 3 years. 3,000 farmers for 3 years. So 500,000 farmers will require 500 years. Yeah, okay, how are you going to do that parallel? How many parallel IDH you can have? How many parallel WWF you can have? There is not enough. So let's focus on helping the smallholders to do that. And then we also need to be realistic with the no deforestation claim. You know that every ship that we send to Europe bring along 6 million data points. That's one shipment. Yeah. And if you are doing inspections of 1%, that means you have to look into what? 60,000 data points. How many days do you need to review 60,000 data points? So the system, as it said, it's not doable. It's huge administration burden. We need to come up with a smarter way so that we can say this ship is coming from deforestation-free area. You don't need to inspect 6 million data points. Just go. Now we need to sit there and negotiate. And next slide. So, and what I'm talking is only about traceability. There are issues of human rights, decent living wage, other social issues that the NGOs will continue bringing the issue. Issues of land grab, land tenure conflicts, unfair wages, all those things that we have heard. And there will be more and more about that. And until there is a clear legality, the rights of indigenous people, then those issues will keep popping up. And we just have to live with it. The no deforestation criteria, however, unfortunately, is already started by EU and will be adopted by markets in North America, in China, in India, in other advanced Asian countries. So we do need to tackle these unrealistic EUDR definitions on some before it got contagious effect to the other markets, before such regulations become really a huge utopian enigma. I thank you.
And thank you very much for bringing the importance point of data, of having data to help us make decisions, and specifically on the traceability systems, but also bringing up the need for the human rights and the social elements to be accounted, and the examples that Golden Agri Resources is already doing, facing, but also turning the challenges into opportunities. And we will have time for 1 or 2 questions. We just have one more speaker, and actually we have a special guest today with us, so we're gonna give the floor after the Q&A. So I will invite our last speaker, but obviously not the least important, who's joining us online, is Abu Meridian, the campaigns leader. He has also a short presentation that will help us just facilitate the discussion. And as I said, after his presentation, we're gonna have 1 to 2 questions. We're gonna take 1 online and 1 in person. So the floor is yours, Abu. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Beatrice, for the opportunity for give a Complapak presentation. Yeah, before we going through to the presentation, we want to respond also about the AVR. Yeah, as your info that Kaum believes that trade can be leveraged to support the local and national initiative. With regard to the forest risk community, such as palm oil, since 2022, we have been working with the local organization and smallholder union in West Kalimantan and Jambi to develop a multi-stakeholder platform for sustainable palm oil, focusing on support smallholder to able to comply with the sustainable practice standard. And they are important stakeholder in the sector. Besides that, also Kaum coordinate coalition that's member around 44 CSO around Indonesia that we conduct policy advocacy so that the demand set measure such as ADR can be effective implemented without negative impact on smallholders, and it can be support policy reform in the country. So if you want more detail about the response from the NGO and then also the policy paper, you can growing through to website Complapak. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah, first we work to have the such practice such illegal logging, land grabbing, and unsustainable palm oil plantation. Complapak conduct in-depth investigation to expose environment crime, carry out a high-profile campaign to raise awareness and advocate to policymakers for better regulation. Secondly, we also actively promote and support local sustainable initiative led by the indigenous people and local community or IPLC. We firmly believe that the IPLC have the solution and must be at the forefront for managing their customary forest and land. We facilitate participatory mapping, set up a local cooperative, and also the alternative livelihood program. We believe that fighting and halting the injustice and harms to the environment and people often associate with a large-scale exploitative industry in the precondition needed to that a local lead community-based initiative can flourish. Next slide, please. Yeah, this our example activity undergrounds. We have an activity in Penasemos that we have conducted since 2003. That on 2003 we have approached by the leader Penasemos informing that the dairy village forests were being devastated by the illegal logging. Then Complapak and EIA that time exposed the commercial illegal logging in the area. Then follow up by the government with the Operasi Hutan Lestari 2 with our report The Last Frontier in Papua to stopping the illegal activity in the Penasemos area. So we work After that, we work the community to map their area in order to secure and newspaper territory. This initiative was joined by the NGO that continue to work with the community. Then on 2014, the Minister of Forestry issued the village forest in Mangroholo in Sira, just around 3,000 hectares. There's only 5% from the total Kanasalas people area is around 81,000 hectares. But yeah, this start on the ground. Then the people Kanasalas have been managed their forest and produce forest product such as sagu, south in the Penabuan. It's like Tenmiron is capital in the south of the regency. Then right now, starting October, Kaum Klapak back work in the Knasai Mosque to protect the remaining forest and the further export to develop the initiative. Yeah, this some picture. Next slide, please. Yeah, this some picture from the ground. Next. Next. Then for the Klabili, this is also in Tambrau. This is using the ecotourism. So we not only using the product from the community, but also how to bring the opportunity for the activity like a bird watching in the ground also. Then the next slide, please. Just some picture from the ground. Next. Yeah, then this example from the Kesempatan Karang in Banten, in Java ya. So recognizing the personal robusta coffee in the Kesempatan Karang because yeah this practice since the colonial era. So through the program CFA, we work with local community. We work with through coffee roastery with the workout and also with the community. Then Kesemun Karang is like the first Kesemun forest recognized by the Ministry of Forestry in 2016. Kaum Kelapa also support the community like these people to enhance the coffee management and quality in the area. Then yeah, currently the coffee still thriving well. The forest is still well managed. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is some picture. We're also going to the Guatemala on 2017 or 18, yeah, to learning about how the development forest in Guatemala. Then we also bring also the community in the sub area in Java to learning about how to manage the coffee plantation. Next. Yeah, for the action or enabler. The key action enabler to identify and use suitable forestry management system, we think there is two very important about the land security, because we need to ensure the access in the land to the resource, and also the conflict resolution also is very important to resolve for the community. Then the facilitation support to smallholder, farmer and local news people, the community, this is also very important. But we need also to look the local hero or the local community that have like support the activity on the ground, because they can influence another community to doing the activity in the ground. So the main role Kaum Kelapak and also agri CSO we can advocate the for policy and regulation that protect indigenous people, land right, and promote the sustainable practice, provide technical assistance to farmer and community, including the empowering women and youth, market access, and the CSO can also help on farmer and forest community access and promote their product to sustainable conscious market, then foster partnership and collaborative among the various stakeholders, including the government agency, CSO, private sector, and also the community. So from our learning in the ground from Kaum Kelapa, we thinking it's very important to support the local community because they have like local knowledge how to maintain the area. So from that, with what happened in the ground, so we can also to support the campaign with the community. I think that's from us, Brits. Thank you.
Agriculture with communities, with indigenous people, and now I see you're also engaging with Guatemala and bringing other exchanges, and I hear continuously this capacity building, this access to finance. We're going to be closing now the panel. There's definitely a lot of questions that we're receiving online and in person, and I will invite my colleague Sonia to help us take one question from the room. And also, there are some questions online that I would also ask to be read from the microphone. So I will start with a question in the room. Please raise your hand. I see one hand there. Thank you. I will invite you to introduce yourself, and if there's a question for a specific panelist, to direct it.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joy. I am from IPB University. I'm a forestry student, so this panel is very interesting for me as well. And especially I want to ask for Madam Corazon from ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. So it's very interesting how you discuss about biodiversity conservation and stuff. Like, we are so rich in that. Asian, Southeast Asian, and other European countries, very rich of that.
Ensuring that each has a role and each has an important responsibility to play in the conservation of biodiversity. As I mentioned in the presentation, when people see the importance related to their reality, that's when you get the kind of commitment for them to really for them to commit, for them to realize that, okay, this is affecting me and it's affecting others that may be surrounding me and the future generation. So it's really a matter of making it close to the gut, making it more realistic, and ensuring that everyone it's really tough. It would not be an overnight achievement, but we start slow. We start simply on the ground, and at the same time, the ACB, for instance, is also working at the regional level, where we are engaging with a lot of the governments, the other sectors, and putting it out there that business as usual is no longer possible. We need to step up. We need to really engage each other. It's not just within our own territory anymore. We have to engage more closely with other sectors, with other stakeholders, beyond our normal circle of the sector. For instance, if it's just conservation, if you talk to other conservation, it's always just the same thing. You have to make sure to reach out to other sectors. It's mainstreaming your advocacy on conservation to other sectors, so that they will be more involved and there will be more commitment. It's doing things at the site level, at the national level, and also at the regional level. I hope that answers your question. It's a tough job, but we could
Thank you very
slow.
much. Thank you very much. I'll invite to each of you to give us one last reflection, maybe linked to the same question, different perspectives. Would you like to start, Alex?
Sure. So I think when we were thinking a lot about incentives, I touched a bit on this in my presentation. There are positive and negative incentives kind of for everything, and where incentives align, you get action. So for example, right now we have a project on ecological fiscal transfers. It's a way of like flowing money through fiscal systems to reward great ecological outcomes. And it's systems like that, both positive and negative, support, but also fines, demands, but also support, that coming from all angles. Private sector partners demanding that their upstream partners comply, but also supporting them. or really important interventions from civil society, all the great stuff that Kamkalapak is doing on ensuring enforcement, creating those incentives for action. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, Henriette.
Thank you very much. Everything that the two previous speakers said, and strongly embedded in regulation and enforced.
On the questions of how the biodiversity conservation can be delivered, I think the two possibilities, one is the charity support, and the other one is when it's parts of your main business. And to be part of the main business has a much more successful results, but that requires regulations. For example, if you are a palm oil operator who would like to get certification from RSPO or ISPO, then you need to set aside the area with high biodiversity value called high conservation value, and the one that has many trees called the high carbon stock. The company that I'm working for has 80,000 hectares of both HCV and HCS, and that is a bigger size than Singapore. And that will stay because it's the only way that we could sell our products with the certifications, which hopefully we will get the premium price that will be able to cover the costs of maintaining those conservation area.
Thank you very much to three of you. As you can imagine, our online chat is flooded with a lot of questions about the EUDR, and we will respond to them online. As I said, we have a special guest today, so I'm gonna close the session thanking first of all to the three panelists today in person, the two panelists joining us online. Please give us a round of applause. And just to say that it's very difficult to summarize everything that has been shared already because there's a lot of knowledge exchanges, but I think if we can pick on very consistent things that we have heard today from all of them is collaboration, access to finance, capacity building, support to smallholders and communities, and also to have in place the policies that will help facilitate this trade of sustainable agricultural commodities. With that, I thank you for your attention, for your engagement. Thank you to all the online participants for your patience and for being engaged. We're going to be sharing some of the resources shared by our speakers today, and you will have more information about the EUDR as well. And now I hand over to Dia for the last part of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and also distinguished speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have more than 80 persons joining with us in person today, and also more than 110 persons joining with us online. And I would like to welcome Bapak Dida Gardera, the Acting Deputy Minister of Food and Agribusiness Affairs, Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs. Welcome to the Regional Consultations, Pak. Bapak Dida Gardera will deliver a keynote speech on policy and achievement of sustainable agriculture and trade in Indonesia. Bapak Dida, we welcome you to deliver your keynote speech.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, salam sehat, salam sejahtera buat kita semua. Disyukur kehadirat Allah Subhanahu wa taala kita dapat hadir pada kesempatan pada sore hari ini. I'm sorry for holding you still in the room for the late afternoon, and apologize for not being in time this afternoon. Honorable Associate Program Manager, Management Officers, Environment and Trade, UNEP, Beatrice Fernandez, Honorable UNEP Director, Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, Desen Sering, Honorable Rector of IPB University, Professor Arif Satria, Honorable Head of Trade, Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Branch, UN's CTAD, Chantal Line Charpentier, Honorable Director General of C4 and CEO of C4, Dr. Robert Nazi, Honorable Deputy Chief of Staff of Human Development, the Executive Office of President of Republic of Indonesia, Bang Abed Nagel Taregan, sorry to leave. Honorable speakers, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. I firstly would like to express my greatest gratitude and high level of appreciation to all of the participants for attending the Trade Hub Regional Stakeholders Consultation in Asia and Pacific region, with the theme towards nature positive trade for sustainable agriculture, supply chains, socio-economic development. Not to forget my heartfelt appreciation to C4, UNEP, UNCTAD, our co-organization of this workshop, for the impeccable arrangement of the event and continuous effort in addressing intraceable challenges in implementation of sustainable global trade of agriculture. I am particularly pleased to be able to speak in this forum. This is very important to improve our sustainable agriculture practices. Based on the data of Statistics Agency of Indonesia, we are growing 5.19% for the second quarter of 2023, amidst of the risk of global economic weakness and increasing of inflationary pressures. The acceleration of economic performance is supported by increasing domestic demand, especially household consumption and export performance. The share of the exports component to Indonesia GDP is more than 20%. Globally, disruption in world supply chains have had an impact of increasing price of Indonesia's leading commodities in the global market and encourage to the value of export of goods. In the midst of various global crises and challenges, the government's main focus is to ensure the availability, accessibility, affordability of agriculture commodities. Agriculture sectors contribute more than 13% to Indonesia's economic growth for the quarter 2, 2023. Agriculture has proven to be the most resilient sector in the COVID-19 pandemic. The role of the agriculture sector in national economy is mainly contributed by the plantation subsector, with the share estimated at around 560 trillion rupiah or 20% to agriculture-related GDP. The contribution of the plantation subsector to the absorption of agricultural labor is about 44% or 15% of the national workforce. Meanwhile, the welfare of smallholders is maintained with the achievement of the farmer exchange rate for people's plantation crops in July 2023 is 126.4. Sustainable plantation platform to several commodities has been initiated, including ISPO for palm oil, CSP for cocoa, Scoopy for coffee, Snarpy for rubber. The development of sustainable plantation is aiming at responding the world's challenges related to the demand for these products. For that, a jurisdiction-based approach and have a value chain ecosystem has been used to address some of the challenges. ISPO certification and the RUN KSB program and the mixed farming planting system are expected to answer the issue of optimizing the role of biodiversity in improving the economic of environmental aspect of oil palm plantation, as the principle of the three pillars of sustainable development, namely balancing between social, economic, and environmental aspect. From an ecological perspective, oil palm plantation can store better carbon stocks and maintain soil moistures as compared to other oil crops. When compared to other vegetable oil sources, palm oil also has the highest productivity, which requires less land area of production. Regarding the EUDR issue, the government has carried out a joint mission to Europe for the last May 2023, establishing a joint task force which brings together the government of Indonesia, the government of Malaysia, and the European Union. Furthermore, on 4th of August 2023, the Joint Task Force also held its first coordination meeting. Currently, we are in the process of establishing an Indonesian clearinghouse for all commodities which will be affected by the EUDR, including preparing the associated tools such as digital platforms and applications. In the context of policy implementation, plantation subsectors should be prioritized considering its multi-dimensional associated stakeholder, which involves various business actors from different economic groups, namely small, medium, and large enterprises. The development of plantation-based industries creates forward and backward linkage between upstream and downstream actors. In this case, industrial products in the upstream side play the role of providing raw materials for medium-sized enterprises and semi-finished product. At the next stage, these products will become the raw materials for the final product industry, which will eventually be used by the consumers. Therefore, the success of industrial development in the upstream side, which is on farm that produce industrial raw material, and the downstream side, that is the processing industry, is highly dependent on the effectiveness of public-private partnership, representing both the forward linkage and the backward linkage. I am confident that Indonesia is on the right track in addressing the sustainable agriculture and trade. My office, the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, reaffirms its commitment in providing support for enhanced collaboration between stakeholders in the agricultural sectors in order to achieve optimal and sustainable results. The government remains committed to promoting sustainable practices and ensuring that farmers are increasingly recognizing the benefits of sustainable agriculture. I strongly believe that together we can create more sustainable and prosperous future for Indonesian agriculture. I hope this workshop can be thought-provoking, which subsequently lead to further initiatives, innovative actions in the future, especially in advancing sustainable agriculture and trade. Finally, I would like to say thanks, and hopefully this forum can give benefit to all of us. Let's continue with a more comprehensive and in-depth discussion with our esteemed speakers and outstanding participants. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dida Gardera from the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs for the keynote speech. And now we enter the second panel sessions, that is a roadmap to a just and sustainable trade. I would like to invite Fabiana Spinelli, the Trade Hub Synthesis and Data Officer from the UNEP WCMC, to moderate these sessions. Over to you, Fabiana.
Welcome everyone to this session. I would like to invite my speakers to join me on the podium. So please listen, Jonas, Harry, and Julie, please join me so that we can start. And while we do that, I wanted to invite everyone joining us online and in person to provide some views on the issues, the problems with the business as usual of trade systems. We have a Menti quiz that we would like to hear more from you before we kick off this session. So if we can have the Menti quiz on the screen, and if not, for those in person, you have on your tables a card with the QR code, so you can use that to access the Menti question, or if you are not able to do that through the QR code, you have the instructions on the card, on the web page to go, and the code to insert so you can have access to the question. So we'll give you a few more minutes just to go on menti.com. You can enter that code, or you can use the QR as well. So, and this is part of the long process that we've been developing at the Trade Hub project to collect views, perspectives, insights on what are the most pressing issues regarding current trade systems that we are facing today, and how and what actions, what actors need to get involved so that we can address those problems. So we would like to hear from you on what is those key pressing problems. Keep the first one still, maybe the responses are still coming, so we'll give you just a few more minutes. Do we have some of the responses for this first question online? If not, I think we'll just move on to the presentation, because we have a very tight timeline for the session. So we will use your responses to still build our roadmap to just and sustainable trade. So some of the key questions that we've been asking ourselves as a project who is looking into the impacts of agricultural commodities on biodiversity, on livelihoods of smallholders, including indigenous peoples and local communities, is what do we need to do in order to transform trade systems or trade supply chains of agricultural commodities? And we would like to share with you today some of the insights we have, and also to hear some more perspectives from you, the participants, and also from our speakers with us here today. So next slide, please. And as part of our approach of bringing different voices to building this roadmap, we would like to share with you one quote of one important actor of a supply chain in Central Africa that we interviewed as part of our consultations, interviews, field work, and different workshops in the countries that we work in the Trade Hub project. So here we have a quote from Jean-Pierre Imele. He is the president of a network of enterprises for green economy in Central Africa, and his views is of that every time consumers put a fork in their mouth, they need to know all the actors involved to produce that food that they are eating. Does the money that they paid for that food is equally distributed to all the actors along the supply chain, to the farmers, to the intermediaries? How much does it go to each of these actors? And if most of that money goes to intermediaries, then that's an injustice. So this is one of the perspectives that we have, and this is what we would like to bring to you today, some of these challenges and what actions are needed to address those challenges. Next slide. Yeah, and then we have, this is part of a Trade Insights series. So this is the video, and we can share with you later the link to all the videos and interviews that we've been doing. Next. So in summary, the problem with trade systems nowadays is about, you can just keep clicking, so the information will be showing on the screen. So we are talking about the business as usual, because that is not really working. We know it's not working for the environment, because all of the impacts we have, and we heard a lot about that today. And it's not working for people because of the social inequalities and imbalances in power along the different actors of supply chains. So we need to address those problems. Next. Then I will not spend a lot of time in the numbers, because I think we heard a lot, and you may see slightly different stats from what other speakers have shared with us today. I guess it depends on the studies and the methodology of the different studies that we are referring. But we know that the trade of agricultural commodity is causing deforestation in many areas, many tropical areas around the world. But what is interesting, and that the Trade Hub project has been uncovering, is some of these numbers in terms of international trade versus domestic trade. So we, from some of our recent research, we know that international demand for agricultural commodities is driving 35% of deforestation. And that's a very interesting data, because then it means that a lot of the rest is domestic trade or domestic demand. Of course, this varies enormously depending on the commodity we are talking about, depending on the country, depending on the locality. So we have to dig in some more in those. And I am Brazilian myself, and I come from a region in Brazil where we are heavy meat eaters. So we have our share in that number. And when we talk about the big agricultural commodities, so we have soybean and palm oil playing a massive role. in terms of trade, and we know that these numbers, they are very important for national economies and also the global economy. So it's an important they play a very important role, and we have to see how we can perhaps keeping that importance and bringing countries' economies, but also more sustainably and more just for all the actors across the supply chains. And just because we've been talking about smallholders, and the Trade Hub is one project that focuses a lot on looking into how trade impacts smallholders. So, for instance, we work with cocoa in Central Africa, and we know that 90% of all the cocoa consumed around the world is produced by smallholders in that region. So a lot of livelihoods depend on that cocoa production. And in terms of rubber, we work with rubber in China. We know that 85% of all the rubber consumed globally comes from smallholders in China and other parts of Asia. Next slide, please. So then what is the solution? We don't have a miracle to propose to you, and we know it's not easy because we are talking about complex systems. We know that global trade markets, they are very complex systems. So we are proposing an approach to deal with these complexities, different realities, different commodities, different actors, and for that, we are offering a roadmap to just and sustainable trade. I am not sure we are going to be able to address Agu's provocation, if I may, to do a very precise roadmap with milestones and everything. But we've been building a vision of just and sustainable trade based on all the research that all the Trade Hub network of researchers have been producing, and also the voices from smallholders and all other actors across supply chains. So our vision of just and sustainable trade means that trade needs to respect planetary boundaries, and that's all about ecosystems and different kinds of habitats and environment, and also promotes well-being for all actors in trade supply chains. And it looks like a very simple vision statement, but there is a lot of research behind this. There is a body of research from our project that has enabled that vision statement, and also voices from different actors, as Jean-Pierre, I shared his quote at the beginning, and all other interviews that we've been making. And how do we plan to achieve this vision? So we have identified 5 tracks of actions that we are proposing, actions for different groups of actors to achieve this vision. And one of those action tracks is about consumption, making sure that consumption systems, they are sustainable and fair. The other is notably about production systems, and then ensuring that they are ecologically resilient and stable. We are also proposing one action track that is all about dealing with local and global markets. And the other that is very connected to this one is about ensuring that we address the power imbalances of trade systems so that we can distribute the cost and the benefits from trade more evenly. And then we have one that is specifically about smallholders, ensuring that their needs and aspirations are met. Next. So what is our approach? What have we been doing to reach to this vision and this action track? So we've been using a systems change approach, as I've mentioned, because trade systems are very complex, so we need to capture all that complexity. It is evidence-based because it's based, we're bringing all the research from the different teams with different commodities and different countries that we work with. We are bringing the voices of different actors with a strong focus on smallholders, indigenous people, and local communities through many consultations, field work, workshops in the countries that we work with. we are trying to be as targeted as possible, identifying who are the key actors that need to take action in order for us to achieve our vision of just and sustainable trade. And finally, the final product of the roadmap will be a multimedia content. So we'll have a report as usual, but we'll also have a website, a new website that our comms team has been working on, and will be dynamic with many different media. For instance, the interviews we've been conducting with different stakeholders. Next. So to kind of conclude this first part of the session, we would like to ask, what is your vision of just and sustainable trade? So we have provided some insights on what we think as a project and as a collective group of people. So what is your vision? So here is the another Menti question. So you can use the QR code to go to the Menti, or you can type menti.com on your device and enter the code. And then we would like to have a look at your responses. So what's included? What are the keywords for your vision of just and sustainable trade for agricultural commodities? For those online, the QR code is on the screen, and we hope you can also join us and sharing some of your perspectives on what should be a vision for just and sustainable trade. Where do we want to go from the problems that we identified of the business as usual to the future of trade systems? Do we have more responses coming? If not, you can continue to answering the question, and we will have a look later. We'll just have to keep moving as we have some time restrictions. So I would like to go then back to the presentation. That they have, it's really fair and just for across the both borders of those countries. So that's what we are talking about here, reconciling international and local policy making and safeguarding the environment. So these are the 5 principles that come from research from the Trade Hub. Next, and I think now I would like to invite my colleague Lisen Ruston. She is the Senior Program Manager at Nature Economy at our organization, UNEP WCMC, or United Nations Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, where this Trade Hub project is mostly based. So Lisen will share some of the key messages of the action tracks and thematic areas of the roadmap.
Thank you, Fabiana. Can I just ask the slides to come back on the screen, please? We can see ourselves over here, which is nice, but the slides are good to have. Thank you very much. So, as Fabiana said, what I think is the key contribution that we want to make with this roadmap is to consolidate all the research that this project has been doing and really break down the actions that need to be taken by action actor groups, by stakeholder groups in the system. So we're taking a high-level overview over the issues that are troubling the trade system today, and then we're saying who has what power, who has what responsibility, and who has the ability to move the needle and change their part of the system. And the key thing here is that if everybody don't do their part, then we are not going to move forward to the extent that we need to. It really takes everybody to move forward together in order for us to get to where we need to in time before we hit the iceberg, as Dr. Nasi said earlier today. So that's what we are trying to do with this roadmap, to break it down per actor group and really consolidate what do different people need to do. And one of the first areas or challenges that we are tackling in the roadmap includes improving the environmental and social sustainability of consumption and production system. And it's a fact that trade is enabling unsustainable consumption and production. Could you change the slide, please? Thank you. And please click through till the end. So we have heard many things today around the problems relating to production systems and how consumption is driving it. And part of that is because the whole system is based on an economic system that is incentivizing short-term profit over taking the long-term view and putting the well-being of people and planetary health first. And one of those things are going to have to give. The reason why it's so complicated, the reason why the systems look so complex and we find it so difficult to make a change here is because the basic rules of the system is rigged against the change that we need to see. And that's part of what we're trying to bring out with this roadmap, that there are big systemic changes that are needed. And this current linear model of production that we have needs to change to one that is circular and that makes sure that we reduce waste and that we are fair in how benefits and costs are distributed. And so we're breaking down the actions in the roadmap per several actor groups. So the private sector and the public sector are two, but also there is a role for academia and media and civil society. There is a role for consumers as a group. There's a role for smallholders and local communities and indigenous peoples as well. So we just have very few examples here to illustrate that something that the private sector can and needs to do, and obviously the responsibilities between different actors within the private sector are also differentiated here, but is to enable sustainable financing to incentivize the changes that need to happen in the landscapes of shifting production systems to become more sustainable. And what we've heard as well in increasing traceability and transparency in the system to enable consumers and others to have the information to make the sustainable choice. Whereas the public sector needs to work together across borders to make sure that policies aren't in silos and that they are contradicting each other, but they actually are harmonized and puts the goals that we all have first, which are human well-being and planetary health. Next slide, please. The other area, which I've touched upon already now, is evenly distributing the costs and benefits of trade locally and globally. Next slide, please. And here we have inherent problems in that the free markets are a double-edged sword, and it does create externalities that are not included in the system, which is part of why we are seeing the sustainability challenges that we're seeing today. And something that we've heard a lot of today is how the private sector can and need to increase transparency and traceability systems to help us get the information that we need to try to do something about those externalities. But equally, the public sector has a huge role to play in benefit distribution, in making sure that everybody have the resources they need to lead dignified and sustainable lives. Next slide, please. And then another area that's major is meeting the needs and aspirations of smallholder farmers. And my colleague Jonas is going to speak more about this shortly. Next slide, please. And here we've also heard a lot of the challenges in this area today, but it all comes back to land tenure in the end, as it usually does. And it's the ultimate incentive, as we know, and also the fact that women are often marginalized and have less access to the capital and the training and the land that they need. And this is part of what's holding us back today. So the private sector can facilitate access to credits and financing, and the public sector can do the very hard work of securing land rights and providing that security to local people as needed. So these are just some of the challenges. And I hope that you will all be interested in reading the roadmap once we are ready to share it with you, which is not far away now. I'm going to hand the word back to Fabiana.
Thank you so much, Lizzie, for sharing some of the messages and calls to actions. And to continue the conversation, I would like to bring Julie Siglis to the conversation. She is an independent consultant on digital traceability and sustainable supply chains. She's been working with the Trade Hub probably since the beginning of the project in different capacities. And the question we have for Julie is, considering the challenges we have in terms of consumption and production systems, how can traceability support this shift towards more just and sustainable systems?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fabiana and Listen, for inviting us to this panel today. Thank you also to the organization of this excellent event and to all participants present and online. After some years exploring food traceability at different levels and discussing with practitioners about success factors for implementation, I see traceability as a backbone that connects buyers and consumers with farmers. But traceability, it is not about discovering the origin only, it's about recording and capturing the materials journey and specific events at different stages of the supply chains. It is about enabling instant and reliable access to the supply chain data that is required to inform key decision-making processes. So historically, for some organizations, the initial driver to implement traceability was compliance with food safety regulations, which obligate all actors to register one up and one down transactions, as Agus mentioned before. For other organizations was resource optimization, including a better inventory and waste management. But more recently, what organizations are looking for is to better understand the social and environmental impacts of their supply chains at different tiers upstream, to better understand where and with whom they need to invest to work and progress in the attainment of their sustainability commitments with clear and measurable evidence. Now, focusing on sustainable consumption and production, the part of the supply chain that has power of choice and power of investment, if we allow end consumers to know the origin of raw materials at the farm level, they can have an idea of the miles the materials traveled and the economies they would contribute to. However, this can only be accurate if we also capture the location of storage and processing sites too. If we also tell end consumers that the percentage of value captured by farmers, the labor conditions, and the overall environmental impact linked to production, consumers can choose whether they want to economically contribute to this scheme by buying this product, or by contrast, decide to switch and buy a more sustainable alternative, all based on reliable and quantitative data. So end consumers, in fact, and according to different studies, might really be willing to pay premium prices, but they want evidence,
in exchange of evidence, interpretable data, a clear justification, which involves counting also on verification schemes associated to data capture and storage. While the same applies to retailers and brands have the opportunity to adopt a more proactive approach. And consumers are limited to a go, no-go decision-making process. But retailers and brands have the opportunity to identify the location of the suppliers that need more help in making their practices sustainable. They have the opportunity to be part of the solution by working with them, by investing in infrastructure and capacity building that supports a measurable shift towards the attainment of their sustainability commitments, by employing science-based indicators like the ones proposed by Trade Hub researchers, a great knowledge publicly available globally. I can tell firsthand that there are companies eager to invest very big budgets in turning their supply chains more sustainable. Programs led by amazing sustainability professionals, but what's their challenge? They need to identify their suppliers at different tiers upstream and to locate the most unsustainable spots. Can you imagine the controversy? They want to know who the most unsustainable suppliers are to work with them, but unsustainable suppliers don't want to be seen. This is why building trust across supply chains becomes crucial. Brands, retailers, and policymakers need to send a clear message. We want to know more about you to help you. Because if we don't make this clear, supply chain actors might interpret the opposite. We want to know more about you, to chase you, and to exclude you. And this is what we don't want. And this is what needs to change first. So let's now focus on the important part of the supply chain, the food supply chain. Farmers and production. Without farmers, there's no food, no trade, no business. So this is why we need to talk to farmers before defining any new solutions and any new traceability mechanisms, especially talking to smallholders and including them in the conversation. If farmers are identified through supply chain traceability, they are visible, they exist. And this can only be good for them. Because once you exist, you should have land rights, access to finance, and also access to better incentive schemes that reward for sharing data and being transparent. However, farmers might be afraid of sharing data because they fear potential negative consequences or further requirements that are at the cost of their own time. So having relatives who are farmers, I can tell that lots of free time isn't something that farmers have. Fortunately, I have seen different projects funded by brands, retailers, and other private sector actors that not only fund and set the traceability systems at a free cost for farmers, but also train farmers and pay local agents to collect the data. Data that is also employed to inform farmers about better practices to increase yields, which in turn enhances the business resiliency by securing access to the required volumes of the raw materials that the business will need at the long term. So traceability needs to create value in both senses of the supply chains. Furthermore, better connectivity can grant farmers access to market data that allows them to better negotiate prices with buyers. And this has already been piloted, in fact, by a commodities exchange that not only would capture ESG data at the farm level, but also would grant free access to market data for farmers. And lately, just to resume, I would say that solutions are out there. We just need industry and government alignment to support scalability, efficiency, and cost effectiveness. And to achieve this, a multi-stakeholder and system thinking approach is required, both at the industry and internally at the individual company levels. As in many cases, the data is out there, and we just need to connect the ones who own the data with the ones who need to make the most of this data by taking strategic and sustainable decisions. So many thanks all for your interest in traceability. And we look forward to discuss this further with you tomorrow in workshop 4 with Mrs. Diaz Suradireja and the WWF Indonesia colleagues. Thank you. I go back to Fabiana.
Thank you so much, Julie. This is very interesting because this will lead us to the next speaker, because traceability and transparency, they are key elements to be able to provide information to all the actors across supply chains, and information is important for us to have better distribution of benefits and costs of trade from local to global systems. And we know, for instance, that the smallholders and at the farm level, we have less access of they have less access of information, and that also has implications for their decision making in terms of selling their commodities, their products. And then I would like to invite Harry Purmono. I think he has been introduced already, but Harry, besides his capacity with C4, he also is the coordinator for the Trade Hub in Indonesia. And he has been also working with us, not only to build a global roadmap to just sustainable trade, but also to build a more national roadmap for sustainable palm oil, which there will be a whole other session tomorrow. And the question we have for you, Harry, today is about how are the costs and benefits of trade distributed along the palm oil supply chains, and perhaps if you can share with us some of the initiatives and mechanisms in place to ensure that we have more even distribution of costs and benefits.
Okay, thank you, Fabi. Okay, this is a good question as well as a difficult question, and have been many years we try to make it more even in the distribution. First, how to understand the power relation among actors in the value chains. Sometimes it's not even the power. Those who are close to the market, usually for agriculture and forestry product, have a better power than those who close to the production of commodity. So, for instance, in the palm oil sector, those who have refinery industry have more power than those who own the plantation actually, and those who own the mills, usually it's not always, have more power than those who have a plantation. So the situation in Indonesia and Malaysia, the smallholder do not own the mills or refinery. So this the powers is imbalance, and if the powers imbalance, sometimes the benefit distribution is not appropriately distributed. So I've been working a lot on the palm oil as well as furniture value chains, to understand the distribution. First, in order to make a bigger contribution as well as a value added for palm oil, for example, oil palm, how to improve the productivity, the land productivity. That's why if we consult farmers on the ground, the question is, can you support the fertilizer to improve the
productivity per hectare. It is, and most productivity of smallholders is only 50%, 60% compared to the large enterprises. And then that's why they get lower value added per hectare of land. Yeah. That's one, the productive. And the second is the power relation. And how to handle that, usually how to associate together the producer association, the smallholder association. That's why we have many speakers tomorrow from the farmer association, because if you are alone, you are very, very small. Yeah? But if you associate together, you have 100,000 hectare, even 1,000,000 hectare of smallholders with land 1,000,000 hectare, then you are getting better power compared to those who closer to the market. Yeah. And to understand the connection among the players, the actor in value chains, usually we distinguish whether it is market based on the market, or hierarchical, that you close to the market actually make a direction, make a order, yeah? Or you are under the those who own mills. Yeah? So can be hierarchy, can be in the network. Yeah? It depends. Yeah? What the connection between the smallholder also in the industry. Mostly it's not really market based, but some kind of network, but not a balanced network. Yeah? Also, I think Pak Agus Purnomo also mentioned many times about the land legality among the particularly the smallholder. If you are not sure about the land, yeah, and in Indonesia there is 3.4 million hectare of oil palm, for instance, the land legality is not clear. Yeah. It's, by law it is illegal because it is forest area. We cannot be a oil palm, but of course we can argue. Yeah. So if it is not legal, how can you invest a lot? How farmer could invest? Yeah? Because sometimes government just, it is illegal, we take back the land. Yeah? So again, the work of tenure, the work of how to make sure whether it is legal or illegal is key. Yeah? The government of Indonesia has a program called agrarian reform, yeah, and social forestry. If forests cannot be natural forest anymore, degraded, but still trees there, then government try to make it as a social forestry program. It is still forest dominated by timber, but managed by community. Community sometimes is not easy to define. Community, smallholder, sometimes it is real indigenous people, local, but sometimes it's not really indigenous people. Sometimes it's like migrant from other island. Sometimes they're not poor. It is rich, richer than me. That's called smallholder. So there is a C4 publication on the what inside the smallholder, and smallholder who own oil palm inside the forest area, mostly it's not local there. It's not indigenous, but mostly migrant from even from other islands. The real indigenous people usually they have land for oil palm outside the forest area. That's already legal. But then there is it's a bit complicated because all citizens of Indonesia, you cannot distinguish between who are indigenous and not indigenous. So, so facilitation for smallholders is key by NGO, by local government, by private sector as the connection, the part of their partners or the private and smallholder partnership is key in order to make them more productive and also make sure there is a certainty of the market. For large enterprise, so must be law enforcement if they do not comply with the government rule. So how to improve the distribution, make it the smallholder closer to the market. There's a program actually from the government, how smallholder cooperatively have mills, palm oil mills. It is a good, very good effort, but sometimes quite difficult to implement. And also empowering the smallholder through association. That's why, as mentioned, we invite SPKS, Apkasindo tomorrow. This is the Oil Palm Smallholder Association. So, and also I believe on green certification, because if there is a green market and smallholder and big companies try to comply with the certifications, then get somehow premium price, then hopefully more value added will be distributed not only to big large enterprises but also to smallholder. And lastly, I agree with Pak Agus Purnomo. It needs time, because I've been working at sea for almost more than 25 years. Since the beginning, there is a program on land tenure, land conflict, but after 25 years still, there's a program on it. I know the is deeply rooted and sometimes could involve a bloody conflict among different. It's not there. To me, like conflict between large enterprises with smallholders is easier rather than conflict among smallholders. Among you are indigenous, you are not really indigenous. I've been there for 100 years. You have been here only 300 years. Who are the real indigenous? I think that's all. Thank you, Fabi. That's all I can say.
Thank you so much, Harry, for sharing these perspectives from Indonesia and palm oil and bringing some of these issues around associations, cooperatives, the distance from where the farmers are to the markets where they have to sell, because this is some of the issues that we are seeing not only in Indonesia but in other countries where the trade hub operates. The same issues we have found in Brazil, we have found the same issues in Tanzania, in China, and also in Central African countries, and especially in Cameroon. And with that, I would like to move to the next speaker. So Jonas, he is with us. He represents the Trade Hub in Cameroon. And we would like to ask Jonas, what is needed to improve trade systems for smallholders in Cameroon? So we would love to hear some of your perspectives in your extensive work doing many field activities with smallholders in the country. So please share some of those insights with us.
Thank you, Fabiana, for giving me the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's a pleasure to be with you and to participate and share from the smallholder. So the question is about the need to improve trade system for smallholder in Cameroon. I won't share my perspective because it's about smallholder, so I will share some insight from conversations with smallholders themselves. Yeah, because addressing the need is supposed to have an idea about what they think about sustainable trade, what they think about what trade can do to help themselves. So as part of methodology that you presented, our work in Cameroon brought us to many conversations with the farmers, surveys, focus group discussions, workshops, farmer-focused workshops, and also consultations. And out of these activities, one of the key information to share is that for the farmers, the internationally traded commodity, and especially cacao, is very important for their daily life. One of the main things that raised is that it is a sort of cultural inheritance, as about 70% of them are known as cacao growers families. And also cacao is raised as one of the main commodities that contribute to the living standard, as the income arises once or twice a year, and it's a huge amount of money. They can build a house. They can improve their buildings. They can improve the access to private water. And also important to send the children to school and also to solve some health matters. Many growers think that cacao is something that brings upgrading. Identifying themselves as cacao grower is very important. And cacao also brings a sort of guarantee to access to credit when it's come to the living conditions. So addressing the question to know what should trade, how should we improve trade for smallholders, is bringing in the notion of the vision of a trade that that is just sustainable for the smallholders. So during the consultation that's happened in Cameroon last June, I was part of the smallholders panel who defined a vision of a just and sustainable trade as a trade that meets their needs, their inspiration, and that addresses the challenges they face. So during several interactions with the smallholders, the challenges mentioned were access to quality input on time, access to finance. So regarding the quality input on time, input arises in landlocked places, sometimes with delay in the time of utilization. And sometimes it's very difficult for them to have input. It's the same with finance. They lack financial money to invest in their farms. The pricing issue is coming in. I will mention it several times. But the first time here is that in the place they are not open to the market, they face some intermediaries that are called coaxers. And those intermediaries give them money cash, give them loan cash, pay for the school fees of the children in advance, and impose a price even before they produce. So when the production comes, the price is already set. Sometimes is 25–30% less than the price that is on the market. One of the issues raised by the consumer themselves is regulation. They see regulation as a barrier to the development of their enterprises, and mentioning the cost of compliance, cost of sustainability. One of the challenges raised is the skills for management of small enterprises when they see their cacao farm as an enterprise that they need to earn money from that, and also land tenure issues. So a trade that improve farmers' conditions is a trade system that addresses the challenges. Now, the big question is, how can this trade address the challenges? So one of the elements of my interventions was about the value that feed back to the farmer. That is about 7% of the profit, while the actors at the top level of the supply chains earn more than 70%. But is the price enough to ensure an important share of benefits. Of course, it is important the farmers earn good prices, but the price is not the only place that we can play. Because if the prices double and that the farmer produces 100 kilograms of cacao per hectare, it doesn't make sense. He would deforest more to increase the price until he exhausts the physical effort he has to deforest. If the price increases, will farmer be able to sell low quality cacao? No, he cannot sell low quality cacao. So quality matters. Yield, quality yield matters as well. So if the price increases and that the farmer continues selling raw cacao or raw oil palm, is it enough to ensure a decent income? From the farmer's perspective, they need at least to move some step in the transformation process in order to raise the added value from the activity. Now, the length of the supply chains also matter. If you have myriad actors along the supply chains, and that each of the actors is securing a part of the income or the benefit, it is definitely clear that the share that feed back to the farmer is small. So price is not the only thing we need to address in order to have a trade system that improves farmers' perspective. The question is, how can we then move? What are the initiatives that exist? How can we learn from what we observe from the field? It is clear that the roadmap that we are building is about defining the actions, the actors, and how the actors take the actions and face the roadblocks towards the vision. That is a trade that addresses farmers' needs. So we have several organizations of farmers. A major part of the farmers works individually, and it is difficult for them to express themselves, to discuss the price, to access the inputs. We also have a group of farmers that organize under cooperatives. And some example of success of cooperative, they are able to bargain the prices, to get into a sort of ocean and to sell the cacao to the buyers who give the highest price. 2 weeks ago, we were in a cooperative where they sold a kilogram of cacao at $2.8, while in the other markets where they are not organized, they sell $1 less. We can also see a sort of organization of farmers to access the niche markets. And there is this Cacao d'Excellence initiative where the government contributes to setting the price, and that this year the price has raised to $3.15 per kilogram. So if we learn from this, it is clear that structuring and organizing farmers can be a pathway to solution. Because when you structure the farmer and organize the farmer, the voice raises. The voice raises, and the way they function, 1 kilogram of cacao sold through the cooperative, about 5% of the value remain in the cooperative to supply input regularly. 5% remain as saving in the cooperative as well to solve some matters. So this can be a pathway to solution, because this organizing will also imply organizing capacity building via the membership, improving the capacity to set the price and then the market power, a better control of access to inputs, and also a pathway to raising capacity in management. The second aspect I want to mention is transparency that has been raised by many of my colleagues from this panel and before. Transparency really matters. Transparency matters in terms of the flow of the financial flow, because the consumer will say, I want to see how the value is distributed along the supply chains. I want to see the value that feed back to me. So transparency is supposed to identify what is the critical links of the supply chains that earn much more than in the world of justice. Transparency in the supply chains also supports addressing the issue of the length of the supply chains with so many hidden actors. So these are elements that should be accounted. When we talk about traceability, let's not only talk about physical traceability of the product itself, but also about the value traceability, the financial traceability. Then the third element that could come from the observation is still about the organization, but the boards for commodities, like the cacao boards, that can also contribute in organizing the way to address the challenges faced by the smallholders. And the next one is regulation. Should we see regulation as a farmer as a barrier to trade, or should regulation be an opportunity for the farmers? So I want to share a sentence one farmer told me. The sentence is that regulation should not be only the environment, but they should build a regulation to ensure a decent price, that ensure a decent living income to the farmers. Then this brings back the issue regarding the ongoing European Union regulation on deforestation. Should we care about transformation, or should we care about having free deforestation cocoa? So a pathway to address, for the trade to address farmer issue is also to have a regulation that transforms the behavior, that help the farmer increases his power of market through organization, that improves the capacity of the farmer and the capacity to raise yield per hectare, and then that control after. So the next step in our activity in Cameroon, in order to continue solving this problem, is after we have built the roadmap, we now come back and discuss with the actors that can take decision in the way could address the farmers' conditions. So this is a workshop that will hopefully be organized early next year, when we are done with the roadmap. If I want to give 4 keywords as the end of my conversation, I will mention inclusiveness in the regulation process. Inclusiveness in terms of environmental regulation, economic regulation, social regulation, organizations of the farmers, dialogues and bots. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jonas. This was very inspiring. And I think we are running out of time. I just wanted to double check with Daya if we still have some time for 1 or 2 questions. No, I'm informed no. I have some questions that came through the online chat about gender and about circularity trade. So I would just like to perhaps share with you that we are finalizing the roadmap, and we should be able to soon share the whole report with everyone through the Indonesian Trade Hub colleagues, and they can share more with you, and hopefully that will respond some of your questions. And just to finalize, here we have on the screen our contest. If you have any further thoughts and questions, we are open. You can write us and we will be able to address you. So thank you very much for sharing and hearing us today.
Thank you very much, Fabiana, and also distinguished speakers. And now to closing the sessions, we have Beatrice for now.
I know that it's me, the only person between your rush hour and going back home. So we just want to thank, first of all of you for staying throughout these sessions. I hope that you find them interesting and enriching the work that you're all doing, because you're very involved in this work. And I would ask our team to just show the slides. We have had a wonderful graphic illustrator who has been capturing all the discussions today and showing them visually. So you will see them. I'm not going to go through all the slides, and we will share this, but this is just basically a recap of what has happened today. We have talked about smallholders inclusion. We have talked about access to finance. We have talked about capacity building. We have talked about the power of smallholders. Certainly the context of the changing market regulations like the EUDR, but also the appetite for countries to be reactive but also proactive to any changes. So you see all the people that have joined us today here. The next slides, please. The next two, please. So this is really, all the wonderful experts that accompany us today in the presentations. All the information will be available today, not today, but at the end of the consultation. All of the presentations and anything will be made available to you. And we have obviously seen the importance of the agriculture sector, which is the core of this conversation, and you are the experts that are really well informed in this, and the need for collaboration. So today the purpose was to understand the state of play of the region, understand what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the priorities. And tomorrow we invite you to join us. We start at 9 a.m. sharp, Indonesia time. And we're going to tomorrow discuss about building the vision. So how do we move forward from here? What will be the path forward for the region to advance this intersection of trade, sustainable agriculture, biodiversity, and development? Thank you, and hand over to Dia for the last words.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. So tomorrow, it's the second day of our stakeholder consultations, and we'll meet at the same place here, starting at 9 a.m. Please kindly bring your name card. Thank you very much for your participations today, and we'll be having a group photo outside that will be coordinated by our committee member. Please, ladies and gentlemen,